Good morning. Welcome to SOGCast number 33. This production of SOGCast is brought to you courtesy of Jocko Productions and his staff, and by SOG Chronicles. My name is John Stryker-Meyer. I'll be your host today. I'm joined by Chad, our technician, our parachute qualified specialist here. I want to start right off with the book. A voice drifted through the greenery of a handler talking to his dog. Then I heard the soughing sound that warm autumn breezes make over brown leaves. No breeze stirred the trees. I pictured dozens of enemy trouser legs brushing against the undergrowth. Two soldiers appeared out of the shrubs, and I heard heavy movement around us. Noy and Ken engaged them. Both went down. I heard a shout and the sound of several men crashing through the brush. To my side, 3 NVA in mustard-colored uniforms rose and began to shoot at me. I returned fire, and 2 went down. I was out of ammunition. Reached for a new magazine. The enemy had AK-47s with their 30-round magazines, while we men in recon still only had 20-round magazines. I had practiced magazine drills hundreds of times and could change magazines in 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I faced an enemy who still had 10 rounds in his weapon. He fired on full automatic. Several rounds hit my hand as it reached for a magazine. My middle finger hung by a piece of skin. The fingernails and ends of the other 3 fingers were shot off, and the knuckle of my index finger was shot away. The hanging finger got in the way. I glanced down and saw the problem. Then I used the tip of my little finger and my thumb to insert a new magazine. Several of us shot at the 3rd man at the same time, and he went down. I think him die, Boss said. This is just one incredible paragraph from one of the latest SOG books, Born Twice. And today we are honored to have as our guest the author who lived through that scene and who continued on with that mission despite having his middle finger shot off, and as you heard the description about the other fingers damaged to the fingernail. Dale Hanson, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir.
That moment in time, when I got to that part of your book, it just stopped. I'd heard about this before, but it's one thing to read it. And, you know, when we're running SOG Recon, we always think about, we always want 30-round magazines. And this is why.
Right.
This is the epitome of every recon man's worst nightmare, which fortunately you survived it because you're just a tough dude.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so just a little bit at that moment, I want to go back to the book to talk a little bit more, because what happened with the bleeding? I mean, after you get a finger shot off and a digit of your index finger, and you're still just thinking about getting that magazine into your Car 15, the old one out and the new one in, but there's bleeding. What happened with that part of it?
Yeah, I think with just about all of us who get wounded and you're still in combat, the wound winds up being a minor factor. You still have more things to think about, and it's the primary thing that's going on at that time is the fact you have to eliminate that danger. And of course, in this case, forget the finger. You need to get a magazine in there.
Well, yeah, because if you don't mind, your book is just so well done. You know how to write. and you write's good. But I want to go back to that because you talked about how you pulled the field dressing out from your harness, but you couldn't tie the knot. So Ken, who's your 1-0, Ken Worthley, and this is on, excuse me, RT Florida.
Right.
And so Ken's the 1-0, you're the 1-1, and Bobby Garcia was the 1-2 who was a strap hanger on that team that day. Means somebody who wasn't a regular member, but he's qualified, experienced. You brought him on the team for extra firepower and have another SF man on that team. So those are the 3 Americans with 3 in Dig.
4.
4 in Dig. And so you had been on the ground at this point for a day.
Right. That was a fast mission.
Right.
Every minute was engaged, every second.
Well, and then just to get back, because after you talk about pulling the dressing out, so Ken, the 1-0, Ken and I turned my hand over and flipped the swinging finger into the palm of my hand so I wouldn't lose it as he tied the knot. There was heavy movement in the brush. Ken pointed a direction for Noi, that's one of the indigenous team members, and we broke contact and began to evade. Bob and I sprinkled CS powder on our back trail and hoped that when the hounds sniffed it up their noses, they would be ruined for the rest of the day. For 2 hours, we evaded our pursuers, switching direction, fish hooking back to ambush our back trail, using every trick we had learned from the old SOG warriors. Mid-afternoon, it seemed that we had evaded them, at least for now. So you're moving for 2 hours afterwards, and
right.
You're moving, and still you're. I mean, I keep thinking about the loss of finger and the tip of your index finger, and you were able to put the finger aside to save it just in case.
Yeah, I had to flip it inside because I was afraid they'd lose it.
Indeed.
And I was hoping they could get it back on again.
Right.
Yeah. That wasn't our first firefight either. We had 2 more firefights just prior to that, and they were after us, and they were tracking us with their bloodhounds.
Right.
So that was paramount in us too, and they were moving all around us when we got to that point.
So you had been on the ground for how long at that point when you had your first and second contact before this?
Yeah. We were in combat within the first hour of landing on the ground.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, we thought we were okay, and we started hearing the gunshots. Every time you move, they would shoot, or stop, they would shoot. And then finally we had 2 trackers, and they came right up on top of us. And Ba, my tail gunner, said, Hanson, VC come, tracker come.
And so Hanson is the way your little people called you. Instead of Hanson, it'd be Hanson.
Yeah, because my Chinese came up with the Han Dynasty. They said, well, you're Chinese man now, and you're on our team, and we are going to give you a Chinese name. And it was the Han Dynasty, the warrior dynasty, and then son. And I don't remember what that meant, but every time we went in the field, they would take magic marker, and on my back, they would write in Chinese characters, Hanson Kombaye Chin, which meant Hanson never die. And that meant God is looking down,
Indeed.
And he says, that's my guy, and I'm going to take care of him. And so we had, within an hour on the ground, we had the trackers. We took out the first one. He went straight to the ground. And then we knew there were 2, but we couldn't see the second one. And we knew he was there. And we started looking, and then Bob Garcia could see his feet under the bushes.
Really?
And so he did the M79 and took him down. And so we got the first 2 down. And then we moved a little bit farther, and we had some more, and we took them out.
And Bobby Garcia, just as a personal side note, we went through training group together. Just an outstanding man in his own right, from Oakland. And even though it's Bobby Garcia, he couldn't speak Spanish at all. He's just as American as the rest of us. Just a good soldier.
Yeah.
And when we had gone through some advanced training with the RTT, he had an incident with a cook. So Bobby's like maybe about 140, 150 pounds soaking wet. And the cook was 6'5", over 300 pounds, pulled a knife on Bobby. And the men who were there talked about Bobby, how that cook ended up on the floor with his knife at his throat. And Bobby says, "Don't mess with us again." And he didn't. But that's Bob Garcia, just an incredible soldier with you that day.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I want to get back because that day, that moment in time, to think that you survived it, still boggles my mind. But then after moving for 2 hours, getting back to the book again, we moved along a ridgeline where there were many trails and every indication of heavy enemy activity. We made a security stop to watch our back trail. My hand ached, and I had no way to stop the bleeding. So what happened at that point? That bandage, you had to put another bandage on, or what?
No.
We couldn't.
Yeah, it would just...
I mean, you only have so many pints of blood to lose.
Yeah, it just would stop after a while.
It would coagulate on itself.
Coagulate, and it was like a cast. It was just a solid red cast. And it's kind of one of those things that you don't want to look.
No.
You're really messed up, and I don't want to look at all. And
if that was me, I would have passed out looking at it.
Yeah.
I'm not big on that blood stuff.
Yeah. But the thing was, on that cast, I could only get the thumb out and the tip of my little finger, so it was hard to change magazines.
Oh yeah, because you're talking about thumb and your little one.
Yeah, and you're in combat for solid, basically, for 24 hours, and you got to change that magazine real quick, and it was the first of many times we had to change that magazine.
So during that break, you could hear the enemy out there. You could hear them moving, the dogs. There's all kinds of enemy activity, and other dogs were barking further out. And you had I just love the way you write this. The dogs barked. Other dogs bayed. Hounds on a scent, your scent. Mm-hmm. And I pictured their handlers being yanked ahead by taut leashes. Our shadows were long. We were at the time of day when the last of birds make their final prep before they bend their legs on a limb and cause their feet to grasp the branch. So you go on here, and then the dogs were a problem. Bob again laced the area generously with CS patter, and that was a standard operating procedure with the recon teams. We used that powdered mace as well as black pepper. Mm-hmm. And because they were the damn dogs.
Yeah.
Never ending. And so at that point, you were able to get an RON established. And that night, you laid in the darkness after that firefight. You were able to get through that night. And again, the night, I want to just talk a little bit to give a sense of you at night in Laos, bleeding on and off. And that night, I lay on my belly in the total darkness of the jungle without moving. And you had in your hand 4 Claymore detonators. So after you established the RON, which is the rest overnight slot, the team would put out Claymores, and they had clackers that would ignite them.
Right.
So your job was to sit there, hold the clackers. If you heard enemy activity, you would clack them off, which a Claymore mine for audiences 450 to 500 ball bearings with plastic explosives, anti-personnel mine.
750 pellets, 720 pellets.
720?
Yeah, and they're the same as double-aught buckshot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just a devastating weapon.
Yeah. 250 yards out, it would shoot.
250?
Yeah, and it would devastate anything in front of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and I had 4 of them in front of me. And I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do the clackers with my right hand.
Yeah.
And so I lined up the 4 clackers, tried to find someplace solid, and I put my heels of my hands on the back of the 4 clackers.
Yeah.
But I was a little bit nervous. And what do you do with yourself, while you're waiting for the communists to come up the hill, which I expected any time.
Yeah.
And so my fingers, I could catch myself going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and
to remind yourself of the clackers.
Yeah, I wasn't nervous, but my fingers weren't listening to me. Yeah.
But and again, it's pitch black. You
Yeah.
can't see a thing.
Yeah.
When you wave your hand in front of your face, forget it.
Yeah, but you would, just as things get to where you're losing your last amount of darkness, you try to memorize everything in front of you. Any foliage that might be darker, and you memorize that in your mind. If you turned your head or shifted your body around, you wouldn't know which way you were facing even. So you had to memorize it and stay there. You've probably been through that too before.
Yeah, I've never had 4 at once. So also, we should set the time frame here. This is September or August of 1969.
Yeah.
And your RT Florida came out of, at that time, we had 3 SOG bases in South Vietnam. We had CCN North, CCC Kontum, which is where you were based with your team, and the third was CCS down south. And Florida was put on this mission. What was the general mission that you were given prior to going in? The reason why you were there was to...
Yeah, it was basically the general one of all of them. Intelligence, all that kind of thing. It was on the heels of Colonel Rowe being arrested and so forth.
So this is for our audience, again, because this is now 54 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about Colonel Rowe and what led to the Colonel Rowe, the commanding officer for the 5th Special Forces Group, which is all of Vietnam, which covered all the A teams. SOG was detached from, that was our headquarters for pay, records, personnel, things like that. But all the other A camps and any other operation went through 5th Special Forces Group. The commander, the colonel, the Green Beret, and his executive officer and 5 others were imprisoned.
Right.
And if you explain that scenario a little bit and what led up to that, because this is aside from your personal anguish and what you went through personally, this leads to a major story that supersedes your personal and whatever the men on that team were involved, which there'll be a few more details on unfolding as we go forward. But if you could give us a little background on Colonel Rowe.
Right.
I mean, he's highly respected within the Special
Very,
Forces
very respected. And I at that time there was a project going on. And when you get the full backstory, regardless what we went through in this particular mission, it gave it incredible importance of what we had found. We had several projects in Vietnam. Of course, the CNC, the SOG programs. We had the A teams that were spread all over the country, trying to interdict the communists and so forth. But we also had certain projects, and one of those was Project 57, called Gamma. And Gamma ran foreign agents and so forth, and recon teams and so forth into Laos, and I think it was mainly Cambodia, and trying to find the intelligence on the enemy, set up spy networks and things like that. Well, all of a sudden, it started to become that we were losing entire teams that completely disappeared, or we would find intelligence and send in larger units to exploit the information, only to find out that they had disappeared right in front of us, and they had the foreknowledge that we were coming and things like that. So ultimately, we discovered we had a mole that had infiltrated very, very high in SOG programs. And it got to the point where 75% of all intelligence that Vietnam found at that time came from that particular project, Project Gamma, B-57. So it was a very lucrative program.
Very productive.
Oh, extremely so. And so anyway, SOG wound up canceling it, just completely disbanded, even though 75% of the intelligence was from there. But we never found out who the mole was for a while. Well, some conventional units raided and found a Viet Cong complex, and in the process of things, they found a bunch of photographs in which the person in Project Gamma, the Vietnamese guy, I think his last name was Mr. Chuan, he was the one who was actually sending out the teams and all this stuff. And the picture showed him with the communist headquarters being decorated and padded on the back and everything.
Really?
And it turned out there's our mole. And so somehow, since the project was ended, how do you get Mr. Chuen back so we could get him? Well, they invented a new program in which Mr. Chuen came back to orchestrate that one, and then he was arrested. He was questioned and so forth, and they gave him sodium pentothal. That's truth serum for some of your people. And
a lie detector test, too, correct?
Yeah.
Which he failed.
He failed everything. And he says, I will not help you Americans. And very, very clearly, he was the mole, the double agent. So anyway, we decided, well, we're going to go to the CIA people who had two programs that were going on when you were there and when I was there, called Phoenix. And it was changed. The name was changed to the innocuous name of PRU, Provisional Reconnaissance Unit,
right?
Whose mission was to eliminate the fifth column of people.
Yeah, the Viet Cong infrastructure.
Yeah, the enemy agents, the spies. And each year they would assassinate or kill many of them. So Colonel Rowe and his people went to the CIA and said, what do we do with Mr. Chuen? He refuses to come back to us. We couldn't release him, couldn't give him to the Vietnamese because we never told them about Project 57. So the CIA says, you shrugged their shoulders. They said, eliminate with extreme prejudice. Of course.
Well, there's three levels of that's the other two.
Yeah, eliminate with prejudice, and eliminate with extreme prejudice. Eliminate with prejudice means ruin the reputation, so he's ineffective.
Yeah.
But you don't kill him. Extreme prejudice is the euphemism. It means kill him, get rid of him.
Which came out for the first time in Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
In terms of the movie.
And it's still used.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so the CIA basically told Special Forces, you got to kill this guy. Get rid of him. You can't turn him loose. So Colonel Rowe and 8 of his people executed this program.
Well, other people, not the colonel himself, but there were people under the 5th Special Forces group that actually, you could talk about the ride out to the South China Sea.
Yeah, they jacked him up with sodium pentothal, the truth serum. Yeah. And then they stuck him in a sack and took him out in a boat out of, I think it was either Saigon or Detroit, into the deep water where all the sharks were. And they lifted him out of the boat high enough that they could pop him in the head with the pistols. And they shot him twice in the head, dumped him in the South China Sea. And then somehow Abrams, who hated Special Forces.
So at that time, Creighton Abrams was the supreme commander for all American troops in South Vietnam. He replaced General Westmoreland.
Right.
He was a 4-star general, and he also had a prejudice against Special Forces. He's a tanker.
Right.
From World War II. Yeah. Where he did good things in World War II, but it came to Vietnam, he wasn't one of our favorite generals, that's for sure.
Right, and it wasn't just that he was a tanker and we were infantry. It was that we had as many mercenaries working for Special Forces as he had Americans working for him, and he couldn't tell us what to do. We were under the CIA rather than the standard army.
Right.
And so here was this renegade army, which Apocalypse Now misshows. It makes us out to be renegades, and we were not. And anyway, so Abrams.
Well, also, just for the record, I mean, Mac v. SOG, whenever a team had a memo, our after-action reports went to Saigon. They went directly to the White House. There was somebody at the White House assigned for Mac v. SOG, and then the orders that would come back to SOG headquarters in Saigon, then transmit directly to the base, and that would be their majority of the missions were there, and those after-action reports went back.
The President of the United States
and that's the other thing that pissed off Creighton Abrams, because that was the chain of command for us, and he was out of that chain of command.
He was out of it.
He didn't have a need to know, and he didn't like it. Yeah. So that was another aspect of it, which is a part of the unique aspect of SOG. Yeah.
And Special Forces and so forth, our general idea of our missions came from what was known as the country team. I think Robin Moore wrote a book called The Country Team. Yeah.
Excellent book.
Yeah, a good book. And basically I think that's made up by the ambassador, the head of the CIA, head of Special Forces, and maybe Abrams was allowed to be on that or whatever. But it was a group of people that made strategic decisions. And of course we got our general ideas of what we were to do. Colonel Rowe and so forth carried them out. Now, Colonel Rowe, Abrams found out what we had done, so he turned around and arrested Colonel Rowe, who had actually been only in country a month.
Yeah, he had been in country a short time. And also, the people who executed the double agent, even though they weren't in Fifth Group, but they were attached somehow. I forget but they also had a cover story.
Yeah.
So Colonel Rowe, when he's approached by Abrams, he uses the cover story. At some point, the cover story gets blown by one of the people involved in the planning. Then it becomes a media sensation. Mm-hmm. There's newspaper articles. It becomes a national story.
Right.
And so this builds up, as you said earlier, Colonel Rowe, his executive officer for 5th Special Forces Group are incarcerated.
There's eight of them total.
Total 8, thank you.
And they...
There's publicity. I mean, it's like, I was back in the States watching this go down in 69. I was in between my tours in SOG and watching this. Like, we all knew who Colonel Rowe was.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute, you should be getting the medal for killing a double agent.
Yeah.
But it wasn't quite clear. And the Washington Post had interviews with his wife saying, "Oh, my husband loved America.
Yeah.
We love democracy."
Yeah.
Or something like that. And so the press buys the story from the family and all the bullshit that came out.
Yeah.
It's just like today.
Yeah. And they put Colonel Rowe, not only, he was in Long Bend Stockade,
right,
where rapists and murderers and thieves and everything went. And he was kept in a Connex, a metal Connex that you haul garbage out. And he and the eight total Special Forces guys were in a Connex. And Abrams refused to send him to the States because he would get a fair trial in the States. And so he wanted to try him himself. And he orchestrated this trial that was coming up. So Colonel Rowe was arrested for murder along with the rest of the people, which brings us into our mission. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So, but again, you guys are aware of this, but in your briefing before the mission, there's no mention of that because you guys have your area recon. And so now after your firefight, and again, I can't read every detail in this book. You just got to get it because A, it's well written. The story just grabs your heart and chokes you up, like just so well done. And but there's a couple other things, and I want to come back to you explain being on the ground in the morning and hearing sounds. You think it's an airplane, but it's really a truck and that kind of stuff. But so we get back to this mission. At some point, you leave the RON, and how do you take it from there? And then we'll come back to your little people come back to you and say, Hanson, beaucoup VC.
Yeah, beaucoup VC.
Because they always said VC, whether it was NVA, which is the North Vietnamese Army, or the Viet Cong, they would not be in Laos. It would be the North Vietnamese regular army. In Laos by 69, there was over 30,000 stationed there to keep the Ho Chi Minh Trail open. In Cambodia, anywhere from 50 to 100,000.
Right.
They would go across, attack our bases, and that's why we ran recon to see what the enemy was going to do, the early warning device over there. So you break out of the RON, and what were you moving forward into from there?
During the night, they're sweeping up the hill. I can hear them coming, and my ba on the right side of me, he says "Visa come, buka visi," and I could hear him. I tapped the guy on the left of me, I think I tapped him with the back side of my hand so it wouldn't start bleeding again. And I could just tell he was just tense as a board, and they were sweeping up the hill. And all I could remember is I could hear the trucks coming down below, and that's when I realized there was a road below the hill. So they were perfectly lined up, heard them get out of the trucks, and then I could hear the dogs. And I started praying. I said, God, plug the noses of those dogs, and because I thought, it's possible for these people to sweep through us, right through us during the night, and not know we're there. But you can't fool the dogs. I said, God, just plug their noses. Yeah. And they swept right through us, and dogs didn't smell us. I believe in prayer, and they didn't smell us, and.
So they went past you as opposed to going through your RON.
Yeah, went through us. Yeah, but they must have made a break, going by.
Was it daylight? Yeah.
Still dark.
Still dark. When they literally walk through your RON.
Yeah, and go right through a sweep by.
Just say that again.
Yeah.
It's dark. The NVA walked through our rest overnight site where you had your perimeter set up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tiny. Only 7 of us. And, of course, especially when it's tight like that, you want to be close enough that you can touch the guy next to you.
Of course. Yeah.
And another thing I realized about war is that you can be 50 feet apart from the next guy, and you're not fighting in the same battle. What you're seeing and doing and experiencing might be totally different from the next guy. And I know Ba and me, and I think it was Noy next to me, we sensed those NVA like crazy. But I couldn't tell what the other end was doing.
They could probably smell them.
Yeah.
Like my South Vietnamese could smell those commies.
Yes.
Now, I'm just a city slicker. I couldn't tell the difference between North and South scent.
Yeah.
But
I mentioned in the book someplace there, I did a mission for the Australians, and it was thick, so thick, crawling on the belly thing, booby traps everywhere, and it was so thick. I crawled up, and all of a sudden, I smelled the breath of an NVA, smelled the Nook Mom.
No.
And I didn't move at all until
Nook Mom is a poignant sauce that the traditional Vietnamese put on their rice.
And I still didn't see him, but I knew he was there. And I just froze and froze and froze. And then finally he moved, and I could just see a shadow on the other side. And then we just slowly backed out. And it was one of those times I smelled the enemy and skipped an ambush. And there's one other guy that told me the same thing, and it was Ed Zebron in his mission, which I'm writing in the next book, where he smelled the body odor and the breath. He was that close to the enemy, but there were so many enemy that he could smell them. In my case, it was just one, and I was that close to him. But the Vietnamese.
Well, there's another book coming out by Dick Thompson, who, for our viewers, if you haven't listened to Jocko podcast number 204, 205, and 206 with Dick Thompson, he's been on with Jocko already. But those interviews, again, he could smell them.
It's amazing.
See, he grew up in the country.
Yeah.
Whereas city slickers, maybe our nose were fouled or something. But you and Dick Thompson smelling the enemies like, oh my God.
Yeah, you wouldn't smell it if you were in a base camp, but out there your senses were attuned to the natural smells, And the other smell I smelled was also in this firefight. I don't know if we'll get to it at all, but I went through 3 rifles.
We're going to cover that part.
Yeah, and I could smell the guy who had the rifle before me on the rifle.
You're just so fast. You're getting ahead of this marvelous story in your wonderful book here. So basically, what you have is during the night, they walk through you. In the morning, you get up and your team moves out from the RON and go back to moving.
Yeah.
And descent was to keep going to high ground. What was the point of view at that point, or just to survive?
I think it was
look for an LZ.
I think we were continuing the mission. We weren't even thinking about, even though I was wounded, we were going to continue the recon, and maybe go through the day, and then maybe think about getting exfilled. And then, of course, that's what we bumped into.
And you still have your bandages on. You've lost a finger. You're still holding your finger, your blown away finger at that point.
But that was inside the bandages, so that wasn't going anywhere.
All right, I just want to get that on the record, folks. I mean, oh my God.
Yeah.
So you move on. Again, the dogs, and you just got to get the book for the detailed part of that, and then eventually. Your team moves out. You have a commo check with Covey, and then I want to go back to the book because at this point the team had found numerous trails, well-traveled trails, and again the trails were coming down what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and there would be branches that would come into South Vietnam. That's the way the enemy infiltrated weapons, personnel, food, supplies, intel, and POWs they would take north. And your job was to see what the heck they're doing out there on this day. So you have a commo check, and returning to the book, you saw that there were numerous trails. The paths were hard-packed, gray clay. So this proves that things were really, you're in some kind of a high-activity enemy base camp, possibly, or at least an area that has a lot of enemy traffic. And you said You write in the book, we set up along one of those trails. We did not trust our ears to alert us to coming soldiers, so we watched where the path emerged from the bushes. Then they appeared like magic in front of us, several of them, alert and in full uniforms. We opened fire. In moments it was over, and the column was dispatched. We swept the trail, and while our Viets secured the ambush site, we Americans charged forward to the place where the trail emerged from the bushes. Ken and Bob dropped down to examine 2 of the soldiers while I secured the trail ahead, firing my rifle and tossing grenades. I rushed back and joined Ken. 2 enemy lay crumpled on the ground. The markings on their uniforms indicated they were both colonels. They were taller than most Vietnamese, very well-groomed officers in clean uniforms. One of the officers had a Tokarev pistol on his belt. The first colonel had a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He was very high-ranking communist courier. Noi slipped up to us. He seemed astonished as he spoke. Chinese, he said. Him Chinese man. No Vietnam. We began to hear shouting. Dozens of men shouted commands in Vietnamese. I glanced into the satchel. List, papers which appeared to be official orders. Bundles of American money. Was he a spy paymaster? This is a treasure trove, I said. My God. Yes, that's a treasure trove and then some. Yeah. But you must have, I can't imagine. You killed the 2 and they're Chinese, they're colonels. And I think when you and I were talking off camera, you also mentioned your SOPs at this point. Not only do you go through the leather pouch, yeah, but because you've been in intelligence trained, what else did they do at that moment if you had the time?
Yeah. My specialty was M11F, which is Operations and Intelligence, which is all the spy stuff too.
Indeed.
So when we went over there, we went through everything, pistol, rifle, and inside the bags, the satchel charge. And then we took his clothes off, too. We took his shoes, his shirt, his back. And I remember when we were pulling off his shirt, he must have died instantly because he didn't bleed all over. It was like he had holes, but, no blood coming out. So he must have died instantly. But I remember when we were pulling off and tugging on the sleeve, the blood would pile up like a dowel rod.
Really?
Just a red rod
yeah.
coming out. And then when the sleeve would come free, it would sink back into him and stuff. And all this stuff.
It was coagulating already.
Yeah. And it was like we would take, I think I mentioned to you once that we captured a AK-47 once. And of course, that's that maroon-colored wood stock on it.
Yeah.
This was different, and we brought it in, and it was hard plastic. And the CIA sent it to Langley, Virginia, and it was hard plastic, and it was made in Czechoslovakia. Well, we would look at his clothes. We'd take his clothes, and they'd say the cotton came from such and such in the world, and they're helping the North Vietnamese. They would examine everything.
On analysis, just from the clothing?
Yeah, everything. Yeah, they could.
What?
They could tell you what year the cloth was made, when the crop was grown, and where it was made. So every single thing on that person was an item of intelligence. So while the enemy was still charging on us, they're on us again, we were still busy unwrapping, taking things, filling them into the rucksack, every bit of intelligence we could get, examining him. He's a clean-cut Chinese guy, fairly tall and everything else. And both of them were colonels, the 2 highest-ranking people anyone had captured or killed overseas.
Probably in the entire SOG history, the 8-year history, that had to be 2 of the highest-ranking commie scumbags ever killed in action.
They were. Yeah, and then of course later on, the information that came off
Let
of
me
that.
just say it again.
Yeah.
This is the year 2023. I delight in this. You killed 2 Chinese communist colonels. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to indulge for a second.
Yeah, yeah,
And so while you're doing this, the team is getting ready to leave the area, and everything is packed up. You finally do move out, and then what goes from there?
the enemy are after us so big time. Yeah, we were in a communist base area. I think it was 609, and the 66th NVA regiment was there.
Right.
There were several thousand enemy, and they were after us, especially once they realized we killed these 2 colonels.
Well, let me just help with your book.
Okay.
Because it's so well written here. Because at that point, Bob Garcia, who was a commo guy, is carrying the radio. Mm-hmm. He's now directing airstrikes. He's talking to Covey. You are working with Ken and your little people, picking up everything. You're now moving. And like you said, there's a lot of enemy activity. Going back to the book, according to Covey later, there were hundreds of them attacking us. I took out 2 of them at the very edge and seized the rifle of one of them. It was an M2 carbine, which was a World War II weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, in the early days, SOG had those before the CAR-15 came out. They were charging us en masse with rifles, machine guns, and mortars. Ken shouted, "Dale, cover us from that side." We had no one on the flank. I ran to the place just as they were rushing us from that side. The ground sloped down from there, and I held them off with my rifle. There were numerous explosions and gunshots around me. Yet I heard the bullets hiss through the grass. Bullets mowed the grass in front of me. Someone needed my rifle on the other side of the LZ, and I gave them my M16. Would that be the CAR-15?
CAR-15, yeah.
Yeah. As I was slow changing magazines with just my thumb and the tip of my little finger. I had a carbine. The smell of the soldier's sweat. This is from the dead soldier you got it from. Mm-hmm. This is the smell of the soldier's sweat and fear and death clung to the weapon. I mean, it was as if his last minute in life was forever stamped on his weapon. I was firing as quickly as I could when a burst was directed at me from the side. One of the rounds would have struck me in the face and broken my cheekbone, but it went between the fingers of my good hand as I aimed the rifle and went through the comb of the rifle and stopped just at my skin. Mm-hmm. The rifle stock was splintered, flimsy, and barely held together. WTF?
Yeah. It's just crazy, and the most, well, I guess a couple of things, but the most memorable thing was when I held it up to my face to shoot. I knew exactly the emotions and the thoughts of that man that I killed. His sweat was on there. You could smell the fear. I don't know what the phenomenon is, whether your body secretes something that sticks to the rifle, but it was as if that guy's mind was still there on the gun. I could just smell it. And of course, the rifle gets shot in 2. And then by that time, we had casualties on the other end, wound up with another CAR-15. And so I was on my 3rd rifle at that point.
During one mission.
Yeah. And of course, I'd been shot the first time then.
Yes.
And then I talked to Ryan. He was the Covey writer.
He's a Covey pilot.
And he said I had held off 3 platoons on that side with that little CAR-15 and that
the carbine.
And the carbine. So it's 120.
Yeah, so this is a
peoples.
guy flying Covey, and he was able to look down at the battle scene.
He could see the whole thing.
He told you that you personally held off 3 platoons as they're advancing on your little recon team.
Yeah, and then later on, I met him at after the war in scuba school, underwater operations, the same one the SEALs go through. And he said that there were 1,000 NVA around us, at that LZ when we were trying to get out. So it was horrendous fighting. It was 100% of a roar of explosions and guns, and yet you could smell hear the grass go down. Strangest things happen in combat, but how can you hear? But I did. I could hear the grass.
All your senses are on acute alert.
Yeah, and you could hear the grass being mowed by bullets.
And the as you wrote in the book again, B-40 rockets descended on us as well.
Yeah.
And then, Hanson, Hanson, Hanson. I heard my name called over all the noise of the fight. Hanson, Hanson. It was Ba. He was standing straight up under fire and faced me. His face was distraught and in anguish. I faced him and ran a few places. I ran a few paces to see what he wanted. Hanson, Hanson. Worthily, him die. Worthily, him die. But again, in the fog of war, which I just want to read this because you captured this essence of the fog of war sometimes. When you hear something, it comes into your mind and it doesn't accurately grasp what's coming in. And in the anguish that I had read in the features, I completely misunderstood what he wanted of me. You talking about Ba as he calls your name. I had been their leader and friend. He wanted me to tell him what to do, but I misunderstood him. I shouted back at him, well, what do you want me to do about it? I thought Ba wanted me to bring him back to life, meaning bring back Ken. In the absurdity of what I thought he said, I blurted out these words. Then the full situation came to me. I glanced around the field. It was a maelstrom of explosions, and as far as I could tell, it seemed that only Ba and I were left alive. I had to get Ken's body home and save the team and the satchel. So it's at that point that you finally hear helicopters coming.
Yep. And I yell at him.
Is that incredible?
Get his body out. You snap him into the ropes, and then I signed him. I said the satchel, and I open up my shirt, and I said put satchel in the shirt, put it into Ken's shirt, so we would get it out. How big was the
satchel, by the way?
It was enough that you could get it into a shirt, but it was big. It's
like a leather satchel.
And I think it was leather. It might have been a fake leather because I never.
Right.
My mind wasn't on that.
You're a little busy.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted Ken's body gone. I thought everybody else was dead or gone, and Ba and I were the only ones left alive. So I said, get him out of here, and then I ran to the other end of the.
And the way they extracted him was the helicopter, because there's no LZ. They had to drop the ropes first.
Yeah.
And they had the McGuire rigs on them, which was like a leather strap, and it had a harness where you could put your hand into, and that would be at the end of a 150-foot piece of rope. And so you're able to lift out some of the team as well as Ken Worthily on that first flight. Right.
Yeah. I just ran back because I figured, I need to protect the team, at that point. So I went back to where that 3 platoons was running up the hill, started firing back there again.
Yeah.
And then I heard them yelling again, Hanson, Hanson. And I looked back and I saw Bob Garcia, and he was alive. And I thought everybody else was dead. Apparently they made another ran. And by the way, Bob Garcia called all the air strikes on top of us.
Right, because you had that section where during this maelstrom, as you describe it, Bob's on the radio. He's directing gunships. They had the 6,000 rounds per minute from the miniguns.
Right.
He had the A-1 Sky Raiders. Phantom jets dropped 250-pound bombs. And then you heard me go back to the book. Dale, I didn't know there was anyone left to call. It was Bob Garcia. Where is Ken? He screamed. Mm-hmm. He's dead. What? Bobby's voice was that of incredulity and anguish. He's dead, Bob. He was shot in the neck. I already sent him out. But instead, Bob was shocked, but rather he crouched and shouted into the handset as the A-1 SPAD pilot, I want 500-pound bombs 50 meters out. I was close enough to hear the jet pilot answer back, "Are you crazy? I can't tell 50 meters from 500 meters from up here. You will be killed. I tell you, we are being overrun. I want it at 50 meters right now. Are you sure?" Bob screamed into the handset, "I said 50 meters. I want it right now. That is an order." So meanwhile, your side of the defensive circle is getting hot again. You run back. There's more ammunition. There's bomb runs. And it just, this maelstrom just goes on.
And they know what we got. And at that time, they probably knew more than we did what we had got in that satchel charge and those two colonels. And it was like at least 1,000 of them. And they were just swarming on us. They had to get that back. You know.
They knew.
Yeah.
And so at one point, I had already thrown nearly all my grenades, but could no longer pull the pins, nor throw them with my bandaged hand. I thought I heard a helicopter, and when I glanced that way, saw nothing. No one seemed to be left on the ground. I had given the radio to Bob long before. Then I remembered the ERT-10 radio in my pouch. The frequency was set. So you got into there. Is there anybody there?
I know. It was talk about embarrassing.
Oh my God! Yeah. But it's that everything's going on so dramatic. All the noise and you're firing.
I think I'm the only guy left on the ground.
Yeah.
I have no radio. Everything's exploding all around me, and all of a sudden I remember that little RT-10 radio. Yeah. And I have no idea who to say, who am I going to talk to?
It's the ERT-10.
What freak, the ERT-10. And so I just pushed the button and said, "Is anybody there?" And Ryan heard it.
Again, Ryan's
Covey,
in the Covey overhead.
Covey must have been monitoring.
Bob would talk to him. He directs the airstrikes.
And he did the perfect Covey thing, which is to calm you down. And so on top of all that maelstrom, and all the stuff that's going on, I don't know how many jets and helicopters were talking to one another. This calm voice comes over the radio. "We got you, Dale. Just calm." Yeah. And I said, "Okay."
Yeah. I'm cool now.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not alone.
Yeah. So finally, the helicopter comes into a hover. 3 ropes are dropped. And I'm sorry, I just got to go back to your book here. Again, I'm not going to get all the story today, but this book is just incredible. And then in your mind, getting back to the book, the ropes are coming down, and you ask yourself, would we be shot there on the LZ at just that moment of salvation? I glanced towards them. 3 ropes were suspended from the aircraft. I watched as massive number of bullets directed at us through one of the 3 lines. So a bullet, an AK-47 round, severed one of the ropes.
Right.
Oh my God.
So Bob Garcia hooked into one of them, and they were yelling, "Hanson, hurry, hurry!" They were getting shot up here.
We want to get the hell out of here now.
And so I ran over to the only line that's still available, and then I'm thinking, I can't tie a knot with my hand. And so I just grabbed what I could with that little finger and my thumb and made the biggest overhand knot I could make.
Yeah.
And then put it back, and I figured when we go up, it'll tighten, and it did. And then we left the ground, and I got shot again.
Well, yeah, but because the way you described this, you're in this firefight, fierce, amazing firefight, all attack air, bombs, bullets, B-40 rockets directed at you all. One bullet literally cuts the rope to your salvation, and you watch the rope fall to the ground like a dead snake, and Bob's yelling, "Come on, Dale, hurry, hurry." So you're looking at the rope on the ground, and you do the snap in. Like you said, again, you're dealing with 2 functional digits, your thumb and your little finger, and you're able to, and you said, getting back to the book, we started to lift off under the helicopter, and as we rose, the enemy charged the LZ, and they rushed the field, trying to get me to pull me off the rope. I was shooting at them as fast as I could, and they were shooting at me. I felt myself get shot in the back of the head. I vividly recall the sound that came out of my mouth. Nyah! I didn't pass out, but I knew that I had been shot again. I touched the place with one hand to know how bad the wound was. Did it pierce my skull? My fingernails passed over the place a second time and pulled a piece of metal from the wound. I would be fined. Really?
Yeah. Assuming we make it the rest of the way. Yeah.
Oh my God! Were you able to put that little round in your pocket for souvenirs or anything?
No,
too busy?
it just came off. Yeah, and I dropped it. Yeah.
Thank God you had a thick head.
Yeah. Norwegian.
Norwegian indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and because there's one other scene in there. The ropes were. Oh.
Getting hung up.
Yeah. As you're finally being lifted off, and normally the preferred method for a rope extraction would be when we practice it without anybody shooting at you. They drop the ropes, you're in a forest or a jungle, and triple canopy could be 150 feet high with 3 different layers of jungle vegetation. So we'd lift up during practice, get above the jungle and fly home or fly somewhere and just enjoy the sights. But when you're in the middle of a firefight, the helicopter pilots have got to survive with the bird. If that bird doesn't survive, you're not going to survive. So sometimes they would leave before you were out of the jungle. And the Yui, here, getting back to the book, the Yui was pulling from above. The rope was stretching and taut, and it appeared that the helicopter was about to be pulled out of the sky. I knew that in seconds a frantic pilot would order the door gunner to cut the lines and let us fall to the ground, and certain death or capture. I hung below the others on the strings, and I hacked desperately with my knife at the tangle. At the moment the crew chief was about to cut the rope, I hacked through the last of the tangle, and we sprung free, shot like a rubber band into the sky, and in a minute were thousands of feet above the battle. My God.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think of all the little once the big battle thing, well, I lived through this, and then you remember some of the little details coming back. It's like, I was on a single string, and I remember for some reason it would wind me up like clockwise and round and round and round and maybe 50 times until it couldn't wind up anymore. And then all of a sudden I would unwind, and I was just sicker than a dog because I was spinning up there. And then we were out of fuel almost because they spent so much time trying to get us out that they ran us through a hailstorm on the way out. And of course they couldn't make it to Khartoum. So I think they dropped us off at Ben Head or Doc Peck, one of the two. I can't remember.
Which were A camps under siege at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were having enemy engagements. They dropped in the middle of an enemy engagement.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Because you did talk about that, and then you recalled bullets shooting through one rope, and I saw myself falling thousands of feet. You're like thinking to yourself, you're imagining the worst.
Yeah.
And I glanced under me. Then Bob grabbed the ropes and held it in a death grip all the way back. The choppers had been on station max time, using most of their fuel as they waited for the ordnance to pound the enemy. They were nearly out of fuel. Ben Het would be the closest place to go. They took an azimuth and proceeded there. They would come in on fumes. We passed through a storm with heavy rain, which was hail, on top of it. And now you're at 5,000 feet. You're freezing your ass off. You're shaking from from being so cold.
Yeah. 45 minutes up there.
Oh. Then the chopper slowed down over Ben Het, and you were hung directly under the helicopter before it descended. And then Norm Doney and Mike Buckland steadied us as we touched down. And, so you're back at Ben Het, and Norm was there. So talk a little bit about how Norm, at that point in time, he was the first sergeant for the recon company at CCC.
Right.
But you two had your own special bond, which
Right.
started from where? You
Yeah.
and then, of course, Mike and you went through training group together, right?
Right. Norm was the 1-0 of Florida. And so he was kind of my mentor, and he became like a father figure the rest of his life. He was just like another dad. And Norm was as first sergeant of recon company because he went from being our 1-0, he went to first sergeant of recon. Then he made him command sergeant major of 5th Special Forces Group, probably because his predecessor was in a conics, in Long Beach jail, but he was there, and I remember I was just from spinning and the adrenaline and being shot up. I couldn't talk, and I was trying to sound intelligent. I was saying, "Did you get the satchel?" I'm saying, and he would look at me, and I would try to look intelligent, and he'd say, "Yes, we got the satchel."
Whoa!
He knew what my heart was trying to say. Yeah, and I said,
"It's critical."
Yeah, and then I says, "Ken, he's dead," and he says, "Yes, we know. We got his body."
Oh yeah, because in the book you said, "Yes, we got the satchel." Dale, Bob gave it to us.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So these things on your mind, did you get Ken's body? Did you get the satchel? That's the predominant things on my mind now that I'm still alive.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So someone gave you a soft drink. It was cold. It was wet. It was delicious.
Yeah.
You drank, and then you realized now you've been on the ground. Your senses are coming back to where you are now, and you're right. My legs had been battered when I was slammed against the trees, and I was glad the bones and joints seemed to be intact.
Yeah.
I glanced at my pants. They were torn in places and tattered. I willed myself to speak coherently, and I framed the thoughts into words before I let them pass my lips. Ken is dead. Their eyes commiserated with mine. Yes, we got him, Dale. His body is safe. He will be sent home to his family. And then you said he was brave and calm. They nodded each other. Everyone got out. So he was telling you, everyone got out. One was slightly wounded. We will take them back to the FOB. And yes, the satchel. And then Norm told you, he said, we have it. We looked inside. SOG is already on the way with a jet to pick it up. What is inside is massive. The man you got was perhaps the highest ranking communist official ever taken behind enemy lines. It looks like he was a senior Chinese intelligence officer. There were lists of names in the case, and with the money, we would guess he was a spy paymaster. A captain walked over. We are ready, gentlemen. All fueled and waiting. That's our ride, Dale. We're going to go with you to Pleiku Hospital to make sure that they take care of you and make sure that no unauthorized people try to talk to you. Mike held my shoulder as we made our way, but I felt my steps grow stronger and I didn't stagger. So you get at the hospital, you settle and they clean you up a little bit. How'd that hospital, how they treat you there? And they really had to keep you isolated because of what you had seen.
I was on a long end of a whole row of people. It's funny, I the next morning, something was poking me. I mean, after going through all that, you say something's poking me, and I looked, and the first Purple Heart you get the Purple Heart.
Yeah.
The second one you get the oak leaf cluster.
Yeah.
Well, they gave me an oak leaf cluster and put it on a 3x5 card and flicked it into my bed. Oh. That was my decoration,
No.
And the oak leaf cluster was poking me. But I had to get out of there. Just to get outside. And I went outside, kind of fixed my bed.
Well, yeah, and the way your writing is superb here. We walk into the warmth of the day, and it was wonderful. to stretch my battered legs and breathe the outside air. My bandages were clean and white. I hooked my thumb in a buttonhole in my shirt to hold the ache above my heart. I just want you to know about the satchel, and they told us so far, Donnie said. The price of that piece of leather was the life of Ken Worthley, a good man, a brave man, and we would never trade the two. But we got a lot from his sacrifice. What I'm telling you is for you, and it is classified, but you have a right to know. And then Mike Butler was there and said the colonel you shot was perhaps the top intelligence agent in the country. And he was, as we thought, a spy paymaster. He had a list of all the agents. The money that was in the leather pouch, satchel was for them. There was document to be given to all of his agents that read, all agents must lay low because the Americans have en masse Tai Kok Chuyen.
That's the man.
That's the double agent.
The double agent that Colonel Rowe was arrested for killing. And that was used to exonerate him, and the charges disappeared after that.
Yeah, and so his name also appears on the list of spies the colonel was to pay. So Donnie explains that to you, and in a way, this is your side of this. For a moment, as I stood outside the hospital walls, my bare feet in the hot sand, wearing only hospital pajamas, I considered the enormity of it all. A so-called murder in the crowded capital city of bustle and lights and pedicabs and diplomats and ambassadors and perhaps 1 million people, resolved by a tiny recon team that fought for its life in a remote and forbidden jungle sanctuary owned by the enemy. It was too improbable to be just serendipity. Perhaps the guiding hand that protected us also led us to that satchel. And for a little bit more background on the significance of that, because at the time, Colonel Rowe and the other 7 were incarcerated. And there's all the hoopla going on in the media. Both now, it's an international story. Mm-hmm. And they're besmirching the reputation of the Green Berets. And there's demands to go forward with the full trial, and then even other accusations in the United States. They're bringing them back for that. And all of a sudden, the Secretary of the Army has a press conference and says, this case is being dropped. Colonel Rowe and the executive officer and the 6 others will be released ASAP from incarceration and without explanation. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are other things behind. There's another book that was written about this, but failed to mention the significant role of RT Florida in that case. And so the other political sidebar on that was, had that case gone forward, the 5th Special Forces Group, as well as the entire Special Forces Command, would have had a blemish on it that would have, we don't know what the final devastation of that would have been within the ranks of Special Forces. But RT Florida that day, at the price of losing Ken Worthley, literally saved the 5th Special Forces Group. Mm-hmm. And it was your team, you and Bob and your little people that did it with Ken at a severe price. And it's just all of a sudden this thing is dropped, and it was years later that it was written about. And Bob, who was a strap hanger, when he got back to base, he turned things over, he cleaned up, went back to another team, and he never knew what you knew. Because Norman talked to you at the hospital. Bob wasn't wounded somehow. Yeah. I mean, I don't even understand that. You talk about the grace of the Lord or divine intervention of some sort here. So Bob goes back. He completes his tour of duty, goes home, goes to civilian life. He was living in Oakland at the time, married, had a beautiful girl. And about 10 years ago, he got a phone call from a reporter in Canada, of all places, saying, we're working on a story about that incident with Colonel Rowe.
Interesting.
And he said the reporter said there was a report of a recon team that was there, and your name surfaced. Are you aware of this? And Bob goes, well, yeah, I remember I was there on a mission. And she goes, well, are you aware what was in the pouch? And I forget what Bob's answer was, but she gave him more details than what he knew. And again, at base camp, you're told not to talk. When you go back, you shut the hell up, particularly on a mission like this. And nobody came up to brief him on what had happened.
Yeah. It's interesting what we did find in there as well. The paymaster had a list of all the spies in two entire provinces, which is 2 states. And a double irony is that the very CIA who told us liquidate with extreme prejudice and threw us under the bus was given that list to liquidate with extreme prejudice. They had to get rid of them. It was kind of a irony that they deserve.
The double irony, as you said, well stated.
Yeah, and the other things that were in the list, there was the money, the list of spies. There was he was on his way to discipline because 50 NVA soldiers shot themselves in the legs so they wouldn't have to fight at the siege at Ben Het. So he was on his way to administer discipline. Norman Doney sent me a newspaper clipping from Stars and Stripes in a hospital in Japan, and the Stars and Stripes said, informed sources, Khantum province indicate, and the whole thing, and it was a big arrow. He says that was you, pointing to unnamed sources, and he was also giving awards. There were 2 underground factories and an underground field hospital in the tunnel systems underground, and
at Ben Het,
someplace in the interior.
Okay, right.
Yeah, hidden. But of course, this guy, if he's going to give these awards, he has to know how to find them. So the coordinates were there, and of course the B-52s went to work on that.
Well,
so there's
you
a
should
bunch
back
of stuff.
that tape up too a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the B-52 wasn't that a separate mission with you?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was a separate mission, and that was timely. It was significant. It's a typical Special Forces SOG mission.
Well, set the time frame then. This is before this mission where before the AK round removes you can't flip anybody off with your right hand.
No. Can't pick my nose either.
So this mission with the B-52 is significant in its own way, which is just another day in SOG.
Yeah. And it was really significant. It really was.
And the mission was this is before this mission, and your mission was to find, because Ben Het was under siege.
Right.
They were getting hammered by artillery.
Yeah.
And the artillery was in Laos.
Big time. Yes.
But it had enough firepower to get to the Ben Het camp, which was near the Laotian border. And they were trying to figure out where this artillery was. So RT Florida's called yet again.
Right.
On this mission, Norm was the 1-0.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because Ken had been on R&R or something. He was out of country. So
right.
Norm's the 1-0. You're on the team with him. And your mission is to find this artillery that's hammering Ben Het. So you're on the ground. Take it from there.
Okay. We were just doing the typical thing. Enemy activity all over the place. We had to go slow and all that stuff. And as we were maneuvering, we were crossing kind of a trail system. And I was staying in the back next to Ba, the tail gunner, because he has to cover the trail, and I'm going to be watching him and all that.
Right.
And just as I'm going through, I see this long thing. I thought it was a black snake at first. And I look closer, and it's a heavy cable wire.
Like coaxial cable?
Yeah, telephone and stuff like that, but thick, big stuff. And I got Doney's attention. I went, and he looked back, and I signaled come, and I pointed down there. I says, cable. I said, we're next to a headquarters. Someplace in those bushes, there's enemy headquarters around there. And so we got the team together in a little spot, and Doney and I, and one of my Chinese mercenaries named Chin, who always wore a North Korean Chinese hat with a red star on it, and he was the point man. The three of us went looking. Oh, and as I'm seeing this cable, I'm hearing something, and I'm not sure I'm hearing it. I listen, and I said, Norm, I said, that's artillery. I'm listening, like, am I really hearing this? I'm listening. And yeah, that's artillery I'm hearing. I said, I bet you that's what's hitting Ben Het. So anyway, Norm and I and my Chinese guy, we start sneaking over, and we worked our belly and stuff. We crossed the big highway and worked our way along a river and all that stuff. And the booming is getting louder, and I'm looking, can't see a thing. And then I start looking, and all of a sudden I can hear it again, but I can see the leaves of the trees. And I said, that's it right there. And we start looking closer, get closer. And sure enough, it's a huge battery of artillery. And then when you look closer, you can see the road system bringing trucks and ammunition there. Wow. So I said, let's get the coordinates of this thing. And so we looked to one direction, there's a steep cliff. We look another direction, there's a bend in a river. And then we look in the map and we say, that's it, exactly. We can coordinate it with the map. And then we make our way back to where the rest of the guys are, and we call. We say, we have found, we believe, the artillery hitting Ben Het. And they were getting hammered. Ben Het was, that's a separate story, but it was like the third perspective of Dien Bien Phu.
Well, it's okay. This is why we're here, because this is history.
Yeah.
And when the Battle of Ben Het was going on, I remember reading about it in Stars and Stripes, the local papers portrayed it, but they never portrayed it in the way you're talking, because the major battles, for that history point, May of 1954, Dien Bien Phu fell after the North Vietnamese army and other indigenous troops there forced the French out. The French surrendered after coming back as a colonial power.
Yeah.
They're ousted.
Yep.
And from that, they took that history, and when it came through the Vietnam War, by the time Americans are involved, Khe Sanh, Ben Het later, were like, these were battle pieces that they wanted to replicate what they had done at Dien Bien Phu. Hammer maximum firepower, enemy troops into, in this case, the Khe Sanh was Marines, and they forget that FOB 3 was there from Mac-Sag.
We were there first.
Indeed. In the village, and then later went into the compound, even though they had barbed wire between the Marines and SOG personnel, because they didn't like our little people. And then there's Ben Het, which again, this wanted to be a field piece to come in, take it, and to be able to defeat America on the battleground. And the key element was the artillery being hit, and your guys are there. Take it from there. What happened next?
These three outposts, and even to back up a second, these three outposts were significant in a very large measure. The French fighting the Viet Minh and the communists, the French had superior firepower and everything else in every regard, Air Force, everything. And so the only way you could fight a superior firepower was not to have conventional fighting, but guerrilla warfare. But finally, they got to the place where they thought, General Yap, that they could beat the French. And the French thought, we finally got them into conventional battle. Well, what happened behind all the scenes when General Yap was surrounding and fighting the French was America was in the Korean War. And they were France was begging the United States to not sign the armistice. Was it 54?
Yes,
That please do not sign the armistice and end the war, because it ties down 2 million Chinese in Korea. And the United States didn't have a lot of love for the French, so they signed the armistice, and 2 million Chinese made their way over to Dien Bien Phu, and they were the ones who were pulling these cannons and bombarding the French there. So they had set-piece battle, and actually a conventional unit, France, lost. Well, the next one, General Yap, the same one, just said, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to do it at
Khe Sanh.
And
this is January 68, February 68 into March. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so they did the massive B-52 strikes and all that stuff. When that fizzled a little bit, the third one was Ben Het. It was a Special Forces A camp, and they thought they would try it now. We're strong enough, we're close enough to the Cambodian border, in Laotian border, we had enough forces, we can do this. So on the opening day of the battle at Ben Het, they attacked with 10 tanks. And of course, intelligence people said they have no tanks. Well, they attacked with 10 tanks and several regiments of people, and the battle began. And the French were getting, or not the French, the Americans in special forces there, we were getting hammered with artillery, hundreds of rounds a day. And but the thing was, is we were doing arc-like strikes and everything else, and we couldn't seem to put down the artillery. So when we got on our mission and we found that artillery, we went back to our radios, got our little circle, and we called them. We said, we found the artillery that's been hit, and these are the coordinates. And our next instructions were to get to the closest LZ as fast as you can for an extraction. And I didn't know exactly what the point was, but Norm Doney got us going. We went to the closest extraction and waited for an exfiltration. Well, simultaneous to us, the 2 Corps Mike Force, and Doc Padgett, was a part of that.
Sure.
Well, anyway, they, on the basis of what was going to happen, they told the Mike Force, get 7 clicks south as fast as you can go, which is 4 miles away. And he said, you make your way as fast as you can. So the 2 Corps Mike Force, who actually engaged some NVA, went 4 miles south as fast as they could go. We were exfiltrated out by helicopter, and but you couldn't exfiltrate a company of people the same way that quickly. So they said, go 7 clicks, 4 miles south, get on the ground as fast as you can. And the United States diverted a massive B-52 strike on the site. And I heard someone say 100 B-52s. I don't know, but I didn't know there were that many. But they said massive amounts.
Yeah.
And they slammed
bombs.
it.
Yeah.
Talking to Doc Padgett later on, I said, what was it like to be 4 miles away from that site? And of course, we were pulled out of there.
Yeah, yeah.
And he says, he says, God help you. He said, you couldn't stand.
Wow.
And that was the day.
That was called an arc, like the B-52 strikes.
Yes.
And anybody on the ground couldn't hear the aircraft. The only time you knew you were there was when the rounds impacted on the ground.
And that was the day the siege ended, that day.
Really?
That was the very day the siege at Ben Het ended.
Whoa. I forgot that little
Yeah,
tidbit.
and it's like we're doing a typical recon mission, but the significance of what you learn, strategic versus battle intelligence,
But, okay, I want to take a little sidebar here because into the personality of Dale Hanson, the first, the one, the only, because afterwards you're at the hospital, and you have this moment in time and where the doctors are coming in and they're evaluating things. And getting back to this marvelous book, Born Twice by Dale Hanson, you're writing about the doctors. They're talking about your hand.
Like I'm not there.
Yeah. So so you write, they talked over the top of me as if I were not there. The younger had a marker, and he traced it along the back of my hand, along the middle bone of my hand. See, he said with a measure of excitement to the older doctor, we could remove that metacarpal and suture the hand together, and no one would notice the missing finger. What? You exclaimed. He finally noticed that a person was attached to the hand. Yes, he said. Here he retraced the line down to the center of the back of my hand. We will remove that bone and close up the hand. And before he could continue with the conquest of my hand, I said, and give me a woman's hand, you would take out a perfectly sound bone of a perfectly healthy hand, and you would proceed from a bad finger to a ruined hand also? No, you will not. We decide what is best for you, he said with the emphasis on we. Actually, we are talking about my hand, I said, emphasizing my. It belongs to me. Soldier, you are the property of the United States government. You do not get to decide. Let me make it clear. You will not touch my hand. You didn't say you will not touch my fucking hand? You just cleaned it up for the book?
I never swear.
You never swear? Is that a fucking fact?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay, so we go on here. The younger surgeon glanced over at the other with a look that communicated to him, explain to this ignorant lout. and he short-stepped out of the room. When he left, the older doctor said, "It will be up to us to decide, not you." "Then let me make it clear to you. If you touch my hand, I will kill you." The major, the doctor, stepped back. Fury fogged his eyes, and he spit out the words, "Soldier, I will have you court-martialed for this. You cannot threaten a superior officer. You will be on charges." "Major, I did not stutter. If you touch my hand, I will kill you. I am a crazed Green Beret who has just come out of the field and has taken whatever meds you have given me. What do you think I will do?" The major glared at me. If he were a bull, steam would have come out of his nose and ears. Without another word, he turned and left the room. The next morning, on their orders, I was on a plane for Saigon, far removed from the two doctors, and I was scheduled for the next jet to Japan.
Got rid of that guy.
But that also, I just think that captures a little flair of your personality there, that your time in growing up in Minnesota, which at this point in time, how did this whole illustrious career, what brought you to CNC? And again, this book, there's another aspect. There's really two stories in this book. You growing up in Minnesota, which is rich in detail, and then your time in combat in SOG, and with this mission and a few others that we'll get into a little later.
Yeah.
And so take us back. You grew up where in Minnesota? I can't even say the name.
Oh, International Falls.
No, but
born in Warroad is where I was born.
There you go.
Yeah. When I wrote the book, my experience reading other books on the wars and stuff, all the way back to World War II and others, is that we start when they got enlisted and so forth, and you go to the war memoir. I wanted to put a person in that uniform. And so this time I said, I'm going to write literature, and I want to make sure when that Green Beret goes overseas that there's a human being in it with character and vision and thoughts and so forth. And so I made it biographical for about 60 pages to show who I was, the person that actually decided to go. And I was a born-again Christian. I became a Christian when I was 5. And I would read the Bible, and I studied. The Judeo-Christian values are who I am. It's how I make my decisions and everything. Went to school, college to be a pastor, and I was there at the last time. From the beginning of the war, I'm a patriot, and I'm anti-communist, virulently anti-communist. I guess I'm also anti-doctor, anti-surgeons anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Or at least surgeons that don't approach options with an open mind.
Yeah. Yeah, he had an open mind. When I was in college with a 4D classification, which is better than students because they're ministerial student, they can't touch you. And I hear him. I'm reading all the newspaper clippings and all that stuff about the war, and it's like I belong there. I'm a citizen. I'm an American. I'm anti-war, and more than everything, I'm prepared to die. And at that time, I was extremely good shape, health, and had a black belt, and I spoke a couple languages. And I said, if I'm going to quit college with a year to go, almost done, I'm going to join for the best, and I'm going to join Special Forces. So when I enlisted, it was with the option of trying, and so I enlisted, and I wanted it in black and white. I get to try at least. I went to basic and jump school, and then before jump school, AIT was Camp Crockett. I don't know if you know about that. Camp Crockett?
No.
Camp Crockett was a secret AIT, Advanced Infantry Training School, 10 miles in the woods outside of Fort Gordon. And it was it was secret. And they had a battalion at a time. And the funding for it came from excess funds out of Congress. And it was secret. Nobody knew it existed, but it was to train people. to go into the airborne units and so forth. The cadre were sergeants that went to NCO school, and the honor graduate would be a staff sergeant. The rest of them would be buck sergeants. They were NCO school. Before I even got through jump school, every one of those were killed in Vietnam. They all went 173rd Airborne. 600 of us took the test for Special Forces there in that those Quonset hut training area, and only 3 of us passed.
Really?
Yeah, it was fairly hard testing, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, went through jump school, and I made honor graduate from basic and AIT, and then my rank was frozen for the next year because I didn't have a parent unit. But then it went through 11F school. And it's interesting, too, because 11F, Operations and Intelligence, are the team leaders. And you had to be
for
an
traditional A team.
Yeah,
right.
And you had to be an E7 with at least 5 years in, or they wouldn't even consider you to do it. Well, for a SOG, they were having casualties. We were having 100% casualties every year. So we finished.
Just for our listening audience, the casualties, when they say casualty, that means killed in action, wounded in action, like in your case, and you're no longer able to participate. So you're part of that casualty, as well as missing in action. And today, we are in 2023, February. There are 1,581 Americans still listed as missing in action in Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War, which includes 50 Green Berets from Laos and Cambodia from the Secret War are part of that 1,581 who are still, quote, listed as missing in action, bodies not recovered. And then we have at least the Special Operations Association working in conjunction with DPAA and DIA have confirmed at least 83 aviators from the Army, Marine Corps, and the Air Force that all are listed as missing in action or presumed killed in action, supporting our teams on the ground, whether Hatchet Force or, like in your case that day, you had everything. You had F-4 Phantom jets, Marine Corps gunships, regular conventional gunships, and SPADs, our beloved A-1 Sky Raiders. So just that little sidebar, but go on from there, please.
Yeah, and then we.
I want to get into that intel briefing from your book, because we got some details here that are additionally mind-boggling. But first, tell us about how you get in from your days in the hinterlands of Minnesota to the jungles of South Vietnam.
Yeah, I should say too, I was shot when I was a kid too.
Well,
so I managed
tell
to.
us about that.
Yeah, I managed to get that done.
You're driving down it. Well, yes.
I was 13 years old and out in the farm country in Minnesota, and my brother and I and my younger cousin were going to do a drive for deer for my uncles who were on the other side of the farm country and stuff, and it was absolutely cold, brutal. Northern Minnesota, when just awful. Anyway, they were going to walk around the other side of the trees, and then the 3 of us young kids would walk through with our rifles and see if we could scare deer to the other side. And anyway, we were freezing to death, and I looked at my uncle's car, and I said, "Well, let's go for a spin." It's warm in his car still, and so I took my 30-30 rifle and I opened the lever action, set it across the car seat, and got in the car. And my cousin saw that the rifle was there with the action open. Said, "That's not right," and he shut the action, which put a round
in the chamber
with a hammer back and ready to go. And so anyway, my brother wouldn't get in the car. He didn't think it was right for me to swipe my uncle's car, So my cousin and I took off, and it was just frozen. All the boom, boom, boom going across the ruts in the field and over the railroad tracks. Got onto the highway, and the very last bump hit a bump, and it went off, and it went through my hip and come up my tailbone, and a quarter inch from being paralyzed the rest of my life. But when that bullet went through me, the shock stiffened my legs straight out like a board.
The leg that's on the gas pedal.
On the gas pedal. And all cars back in those days could go 100 miles an hour. And my uncle's would go 120, I'll tell you that. Because my leg was just straight out on top of the gas pedal. I could not get it off. And I was trying with both hands to pull my leg off because I'm going down this country road so fast, and everything's blurry. And got to the place that I better start steering here too. And I had one arm on the wheel and one yanking on my leg. Whoa. And then finally the adrenaline, the shock released, and I pulled could pull it off with my leg.
After you've gone several miles down a country road over 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, and my brother and my cousin ran through the trees and said, Dale's been shot, Dale's been shot. So the uncles, both of whom were wounded in World War II, they found me in the car, and I was across the wheel, and I was still awake and all that stuff, but I was really messed up. So my uncle carried me around to the passenger side, and my uncle got in the back. No phones in those days either. No. And 120 miles to the next hospital, which is Warroad, Minnesota, where I was born, and got me in there. And I had to know that my parts worked. I guess that's like a Vietnam thing. So I got to the car, and he was about to carry me to the door, which, they had a long line, beautiful hospitals. That's a long line to walk.
Yeah.
And got out of the car. He started to carry me. I said, no, I have to walk. And I started walking, and I walked, and it was awful. And I got to the door, and that's when I collapsed.
Yeah.
And he caught me and bled out and stuff like that.
How old were you?
13. It was the first of my shots, being shot. Have you had your shots lately? Yeah.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Yeah. But
all right. So anyways, that's a hell of a story. We had to get that sidebar in there.
Yeah.
Just life and growing up in Minnesota in the middle of the winter.
Yeah.
So through all this, at what point do you, Dale Hanson, the future preacher, say, I want to get in the Army? And had you thought about Special Forces? What had impacted you?
Robin,
the book,
Ballad of the Green Beret, and Robin Moore's book, both were out about that time. And it's quite clear that they were the best, And so if coming out of college, I said, if I'm going to quit, it's not to be a line person or something. I'm going to be in the best or I'm not going to do this. And so finally I got to this place. I said, I'm hearing about 400 people a day dying in a war, and in a month or a week or whatever it was. Yeah. And I believe in the war. What am I doing sitting here in a classroom? And so I went down and enlisted in February 1968, I think it was. And if
at the height of the war during the Tet Offensive.
Exactly. And the truth of the matter is if they didn't send me there, I would have written a congressman, just the opposite of the draft dodgers. And if they didn't have a plane, I would have paid my own way. I am going to go and do my part. And so I did. And when I actually went overseas, I should give you a statistic too. When I was about to go into 11F out of jump school, finished phase 1, a major came out to our class. And
which class is this? At the end of phase 1?
Yeah.
This is prior to doing your MOS training.
Exactly.
So this is a meeting with all the candidates who want to be Special Forces.
Right.
There's an MOS determination. So there's 11 Bravo, which is weapons.
Yep.
Charlie, which is explosives. Delta, the medic. And then the F is the team leader. And then Echo's the commo.
Right. And anyway, this major came out and addressed us. And he says, there's a top secret program. Now, I recall him saying CNC. I was talking to Mike Buck, and he said, no, they never said CNC. They said top secret program. But right. I certainly remember CNC at some point because everybody knew what it was. But it would be whispered, it was the thing, But anyway, he came out and he says, we're looking for people who would volunteer for that. And I wasn't an E7 with 5 years in. Right. None of us were. And so they were really getting desperate for 11Fs, which is what the mindset for going in recon and SOG is. Nonetheless, it's that.
Sure.
And he says you need to have a minimum of 130 IQ, which if you volunteered for this program, it'd kind of make that suspect, you know. But you had to have a minimum of 130 IQ, and you had to volunteer for this school.
Yeah.
And when you finish, you're going to go directly to CNC or SOG. And except others remember this highly secret thing. And he says at the end of 3 months, 85% of you will be dead. And so I went home and I said, algebra, what number do you start with?
Yeah.
85% of it 4 times to wind up with Dale Hanson at the end of it. And it's a little over 4,000 people to wind up with me at the end of a year if 85% die.
Yeah, if those numbers hold true.
Yeah. But it's like, I'm not into suicide, but I will take a risk for the right thing.
Yeah.
And we all did. All
Absolutely.
of us.
Sure.
We all did over and over. You can get a guy maybe to go on 1 mission, but try get him to go on 2 of them. Is that right?
We had a few 1-mission men.
Yeah.
They did it. And some cases, like in the case of Lynn Black, you had an American, the son of a general, a leg army general, who prayed during the entire day on the ground, never fired a shot in anger. Prayed and
really,
yeah, he chastised the team members occasionally when they used the Lord's name in vain during their profanity when they came up against 10,000 men from an NVA division.
Yeah.
Or as compared to others that, like in my case, we had a guy on the team from the 173rd fought like a stud. He stood tall on the field. He came back and said, "I can't do this."
Yeah.
And you respect a man that says he can't.
Yeah.
So there was some just said we can't.
Yeah.
And they moved on.
Yeah.
Without recrimination.
Yeah. The tension and all that stuff is unbelievable. The fight or flight adrenaline.
Sure.
Kind of a thing. Yeah.
So anyway, get back. So long story short, you make it because you got a better than 130 IQ.
Yeah.
And not into suicide, but you're willing to go for a good mission.
And our people graduated, and we were waiting for the orders. So DeLuca, I forgot his first name, and he's a friend too. He was our first sergeant, and he was talking to me someplace.
You met him in training group.
Yeah.
During the jump on the you're on the aircraft. The first time you meet.
Yeah, talk about a guy who can tease you when you're scared to death. But he says, Dale, you're having trouble. You want to go to CNC now? He says, call Mrs. A. And of course James Bond.
Well, this is all after you get your MOS training, though.
Yeah.
So let's get back to your, if you don't mind, that thought. So that you get in, you go through the training. The reason why I want to do that, you've got some other gem in your book that I've read nowhere else. Or if I have, I forgot it because I'm getting old. But at one part, you're in your training, and there's an instructor who comes out. And you're kind enough not to name him. And, my name is Novi.
Yeah,
and he goes, this is, and he's speaking, is that like, would you say that's a German or a Danish accent?
He was Czech.
Czech, okay. Yeah. He writes, or you write him as saying this. Again, I don't know how you captured this, but it's incredible.
Yeah. He comes, and I might add too.
Yeah.
Every instructor you ever see, he's got starch fatigues. He's strack. He looks perfect.
Right.
Jan Novi comes in, looks like he just got washed in his clothes, and he comes in there shuffling in, and it's like, this is not. He's not here for the photograph.
Well, let me turn to your book, sir.
Yes,
because the way you write this, it's another reason to get this book. I'm not going to be able to cover all the stories today, but when you get it, you read it, you'll love it. My name is Novi. This is my Third Army. This Special Forces. I was in Europe and fought against the Nazis. Then the communists defeated the Nazis and took their turn brutalizing my country. So I fought against them. I joined the Americans because my country was destroyed and my family, they all perished. I joined the Green Berets to fight the communists. The world was plenty of communists to fight. I was in Korea on the east side of the Chosun Reservoir when the Marines refused to help U.S. regular army. Then I was in Central America and Doc Cubans. The sergeant moved to the podium, and the light there set his deep wrinkles and scars in the shadows. I cannot remember how many times that I swam the Rhine on intelligence missions into Eastern Europe. One time, I got captured. Twice I was shot. Once in the river and almost did not make it back across. He took a deep breath, as though he was deciding he should go on. Most of what you learned you will use in Europe. Urban situations. I want to tell you something you need to know in Vietnam and the rest of Southeast Asia. Anyone see the James Bond movies and the communist group called Smurfs? That ain't just Hollywood. Smurfs is real. It exists. The name has changed. Call it KGB if you want. Smurfs is Russian and means death to spies. You think that is Europe? But I'm going to Asia. The Russians use cut-out countries for deniability. You studied that already. One of these countries that they use in my country. There are 2,000 people in one place in Czechoslovakia just studying art of torture. Did you hear me? That is all they do. They practice on political prisoners, and they sometimes get American prisoners. Castro sends some of his Cubans to torture American prisoners for practice. They do not care so much about the information that they do prisoners possess. They just enjoy torturing Americans. I never heard that before.
Yeah, and it's true. You know, a Smurf is real, and
I never heard that before. I mean, I've read all the books, love James Bond books.
Yeah, just like Odessa is real.
Yes.
Yeah, Novi was he was a wonderful gentleman. His fingernails were all gone, and I would see him. They pulled out his fingernails. He was tortured and all that kind of thing. And John Novi is one of those guys you wouldn't even notice, other than the fact he doesn't look like he ironed his clothes.
Right.
And John Novi was one of those guys who fought against the communism and so forth, suffered everything, and was just quietly there. And when I knew him, I saw him again after this in Vietnam.
Really?
He worked in the motor pool.
What?
He ran the motor pool. And then John Novi.
At Kontum?
Yeah. And he was a friend. And
sure.
I was into martial arts and then Jocko. I used to get his carpenter to make me some nunchaku sticks.
Oh, the good nunchucks out of that special hardwood?
Exactly.
Oh, man.
One day Novi, and these are the last times I saw him. One day Novi and a guy, Smith, and there's another guy, that guy that ran the mess hall. And the three of them were going to go to Pleiku, to buy some stuff, which was 6 miles down the road. And the three of them went in a Jeep, and I was visiting with him, talking to him, and he lent me a book of poetry. And I'll even tell you the poem, because I was really nervous on this thing. And he gave me a book of poems of wartime, people who wrote poems of war. And there was one of an Italian poem. It's only about 2-3 lines. And I memorized it right on the spot. It says, all night long, thrown against a buddy, slain, with his gnashing teeth bared to the full moon. I was writing letters full of love. Never had I hugged life so dear.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Novi gave me this book. And I was telling him, I says, I'm reading your book. I said, thank you for the book. And he says, well, don't take my carpenter too, Well, anyway, then they go down the road to Pleiku. And within 2 or 3 hours, I get a call from somebody in the base. He says, Dale, did you hear what happened to Novi? And the NVA had ambushed him between Kontum and Pleiku.
No.
Yes, and the boat was the thing was flipped over. Novi had a round across his forehead, and he landed against the tree sitting up. but he was absolutely, totally paralyzed, stunned temporarily, but he was stunned, couldn't move. His eyes were open. He could see everything, couldn't move a muscle. And then Smith, one guy was in the front seat, and he was shot right out of, and then the other one was underneath the Jeep. And when he saw the NVA coming in their feet, he tried to pull his feet under, and they saw it, and they shot him underneath the Jeep. Well, they went over to Novi, the third person, and they were going to, they saw it, he was shot in the head and not moving a muscle. They said, well, he's dead. And one of the guys saw a ring on his hand, and he tried to take the ring off of Novi's hand, and they couldn't get the ring off. And the other NVA are saying, hurry, 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 because, the help is going to be coming, down the road. And he couldn't get the ring off. So he takes Novi's K-bar knife, and he starts sawing off Novi's finger, and he chops off his finger and takes the ring. And all the guys are saying, hurry, hurry. And he's holding up the ring in the air, and then finally he's satisfied, and they take off into the jungle. And so I see Novi at the hospital there, and that was my last goodbye to Jan Novi. And just a fine man, beginning to end. Doesn't fit any of the stereotypes, just a quiet man. Just like, what's the guy that, Sloan, I think his name, after World War II, he wrote a book called The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And he was the typical person in World War II who you never noticed, but he was always there and doing his thing.
Well, I think, too, I want to return just a little bit more to your book here because of this. I was jarred when I read this stuff because here he turns this all back to why he was there as you and others are training to be intelligence officers or the intelligent team member, the 11F on a Green Beret team. And it brings it back to SOG. Mm-hmm. And we've heard other versions of this, but yours is so point on here. And he talked a little bit. I just want to get the flavor of him because he said, again, he's in this discussion as a not a professor, but an instructor to SF intelligence people training. I want to tell you one more thing. We actually know where most of our American prisoners of war are. We know their names. We know if they are in a bamboo cage, half sunk in mud, and where in the jungle they are. See, this is all new to me. Mm-hmm. Most Americans are captured or in base camps areas in Vietnam. Some are kept in the tunnels under the country. Some prisoners are taken into Laos and Cambodia or even farther to visit our Cuban tormentors. Most of you people who go to SOG, who get captured, will be captured in Laos or Cambodia or North Vietnam. It is there that your journey will begin. You are valuable to them. A soldier who captures you can get a reward of enough money to live on for 5 years. They have a medal minted just for anyone who kills or captures someone from SOG. It is like our Bronze Star or Silver Star, only it is just for those who kill or capture one of us. And when they capture you, our government will deny that they know you. His eyes scanned us, pausing at us individually, looking into our eyes. He continued, our government has files on all our soldiers who have been captured. We have our assets on the ground and our spies in the sky. We know, he said, hitting the podium with his fist. On some of the files, written in small letters, in the top right-hand corner are the initials, MB. It means Moscow bound. They go to Czechoslovakia. You must prepare for this. He stood there with his head bowed, with both of his fingers outstretched on the top of the stand, and drummed the surface with his fingertips. But there was no tapping sound to penetrate the depths of the room. The soft velvet thumping. One more thing, and I am through. I have seen this in too many enemy wars. Someday, when they defeat them and demand our prisoners back, a dignitary in a suit will have a list of our prisoners that the communists have, and we know that they have them. They will call out the name of the prisoner, and they will check his name from the list. At the end, there will be many names that have no checks beside their names. Names of prisoners that we know that they have. The man with the government will not ask for those men. He will just fold up the paper with dignity, place it into his breast pocket, and walk away. With a loud sigh and without looking up at us, he slowly left the room. I thought of that sergeant and his broken body as a sack of treasure with his sorrow and sacrifice and wisdom. And it just goes on. And then, what an amazing story. I never heard about the MB before.
Yeah, Muscovon.
Yes.
It's absolutely incredible. I don't know how we knew, but we knew where everybody was. I don't know if our satellite spy systems, like SR-21 or whatever that was, things like that, were more sophisticated than they ever let on. But we knew where everybody was. And it was almost like John Novi there was a prophet, because I can get, and the name of the guy, that dignitary who had the list, and that was Kissinger.
Right.
And it was Operation Homecoming.
But he's foreseeing what Kissinger did 5 years later.
To the detail. And it's a historical record. Kissinger went over there, and there was a list of 1,200 or some names. Right. And the NBA were going to release them. Now, this was the list of our people that we knew. Right. So as they got released, their names would be called, and they would take them off the list. And as Kissinger and his aide were going through that, there were names that we didn't know that they had. Somehow we missed it, and there's about 400 of them that they had as prisoners that we probably thought were killed or AWOL or something. Right. And but there was a list of about 600 that we were absolutely certain that they had, and we knew that they had them. And Kissinger, when the list was finished, and he knew he didn't get all of his prisoners, he folded up that list and put it in his breast pocket. And he said to his aide, "Those are acceptable casualties for peace." In other words, they deliberately left our prisoners with the idea that, well, we'll have some political, formal attitude of peace here. Right. And
because they wanted the Paris Peace Accords to be in fact.
Yeah.
And with Watergate going on, at that time, 1973, they wanted something positive, something powerful. They brought the prisoners home, and it was very powerful moment in our history.
Very moving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because in Trenton, we had a POW that we had supported the family for over 2 years. When he came back, it was like, holy schmoly, here's this Captain Venanzi.
And the irony of some of this is that you could ask, say, an NVA official under a polygraph, do you have any American prisoners? And we're thinking about Green Berets. They would say no, and they would pass the test, because we weren't entitled to prisoner of war status under Geneva Convention because we were sterile.
Right.
We didn't have our nation. We didn't have dog tags. We didn't have anything.
Yeah. Any Americans that were on a SOG team, whether a hatchet force or a recon team, went across the fence into Laos, Cambodia, or North Vietnam, were shot, captured, killed. That gave our American government, as we said earlier, like the Russians, plausible deniability.
Right.
And we were told to speak another language. Not even like, I said, well, can I speak Pig Latin? Because I'm still struggling with English. Yeah. That's my foreign language.
Yeah. Yeah. To them, we weren't prisoners of war. We were war criminals.
Right.
Although they know, in fact, we were not only soldiers, but the cream of the crop of the soldiers. But nonetheless, the technicality that up until late '69, we were sterile, couldn't even have an American weapon, And
we were carrying cars by '68 down in FOB1, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But still, even that, I mean, they were carrying. Before that, we had the Sten guns,
exactly.
The Swedish K.
I had to carry
That's
Swedish
K first.
Yeah.
Yeah, the open bolt Swedish K.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy. But here's another thing. In your book, you talked about the next phase of training. On Monday, you said you marked the next week of training, and your instructor was teaching on the methods the communists were using in the United States. And I think there's this little passage here. It's a little bit of a sidebar from your story, but it's also, I think it's so apropos to what's happening today. It gives us a little insight. And again, this is your class, 1968. The instructor who knows communism inside and out is talking to you, says, getting back to your book, let me talk to you about the communist use of the fifth column. A fifth column refers to the efforts of any group of people to undermine a larger group from within. They may be likened to termites working inside a tree. On the outside, the tree looks healthy and strong, but the inside is rotten and ready to fall. The fifth column will use anything from music to marching against the war. Their activities might seem harmless and have merit on the outside, but they have a goal in mind. They want the destruction of America and to make it a communist state. For the next 4 hours, the instructor exposed Communist Front organizations that work in America. Getting back to your book. Take, for instance, music. Pretty innocent stuff, it would seem. But you take a hypnotic beat and their lyrics, get them into drugs and sex, and you have termites eating at the soul of our country. The sergeant began to recite the findings of the House Committee on American activities regarding various record companies and musicians and stated their goals. And you personally read the books, The Rhythm, Riots, Revolution, A Nation of Sheep, The Ugly Americans, Orwell's Animal Farm. And you also read the books David Noble and Hargis and Schwartz regarding the Russian Pavlov's mind warfare and hypnotic music. The communists will use any movement to weaken the country and drive a wedge through us. Does that sound familiar? Like science, something that could be read today.
Yeah.
The termites in our society. And then last but not least, you passed on photographs. It says, take the race riots that are going on. Just as we are at war, the fifth column is orchestrating anti-war marches and riots and race riots. This is no coincidence. To have somebody put it in that direct fashion. I remember us getting general briefings, but nothing detailed like you had in your intelligence training.
Yeah.
Jarring.
Yeah.
And apropos.
Yeah. It's interesting. We go to these top secret classes. The building would be surrounded by an empty field, which is surrounded by barbed wire and patrolled by guards. And you go to the door, and there are guards at the door, and they will check your ID and your name, and they will guard the door. You go inside, you sign a roster, and all this stuff. It's all top secret. No notes are taken, and all this stuff, and handouts are left, etc. Somehow, I wound up with a couple things. I have no idea how I got them out. But nonetheless, I'm up there with Biden and Trump, I guess.
There you go. You're there.
Yeah. But
oh God, the FBI's going to come and get you, man. 50 years later.
No kidding.
Fan belt inspectors.
I'm trying to not say a name, but let's just say euphemistically, the most famous black hero in the United States.
Don't go
Won't
down
say your
that
name.
road. Yes.
I've got a picture of him in a communist committee meeting. Yes. And he was a member of more Communist Front organizations than any person in the United States, 120 Communist Front organizations. He was an alcoholic, a womanizer, and he headed the race stuff, not because he wanted racial equality, but because he was a communist. They wanted to divide America. And that was his motive. His number one affiliation is Communist Party. And that was one of the examples of how people tried to split up our country. You know, and of course, Fifth Column, was it Robin Moore wrote the Fifth Column?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but of course the imagery is being attacked from all sides, and then finally you're attacked from the inside.
Yeah. Well, those are lessons that are significant and important for today, even.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're at about the 2 hour mark here, and it's like, I don't know. This time
we just got here.
We did. I don't want to go too far, but the book has other stories. There's one at the end. Is there something else that you would like to go into to characterize? Because you heal up, you go back, you bounce back, you come back, and you even when you returned, the situation in Vietnam was much different.
Yes.
And you came back in 70 or 71. It was much different than what it was when you were there and when you first arrived at the end of 68 or 69.
Yeah.
And when you came back, somehow your buddy Mike was still there, and of course you explained to them, well, first of all, when you returned, what was the time frame? What was the date or the month? What year is it? 70?
Probably 70. Let's see, 69. When I came back, the second tour was 70.
Yes.
And then the third tour would be 71.
Right. So in the book, you talk with Mike. Again, Mike Buckland, who you had gone through training group with. When you get back, he's there.
Yeah.
He's glad to see you.
Just about the only one left out of our class.
Right.
You know, everybody's gone, dead.
Either gone, dead, or MIA, WIA.
Yeah.
And so he briefed you. This is like as the Vietnamization is going on. Here is what's happening. He's talking to you. They are sending our American troops home and expecting the South Vietnamese to take it over. It is called Vietnamization. And you replied, I know about that. It's a big deal in the States now. Mike nodded. The 4th Infantry Division has been sent home. And there are no conventional forces near us anymore, meaning Khartoum at CCC.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and you told him, well, I saw some 4th Infantry people coming in, and he says, well, they're probably the last ones that are leaving. And the troop withdrawal has left the 3 provinces around us empty, and the North Vietnamese has taken them over. This is in South Vietnam, and this is a tactical situation. They become sanctuaries and unmolested supply routes. The South Vietnamese have abandoned the area around us to the communists. Doing a local mission now is almost as dangerous as going over the fence on our old operations. He took a long drink. The people are not the same either. A lot of our SF people have become casualties, and the big shots have sent them 75th Rangers as replacements. It is not to knock their courage, but the fact is they're not trained as special forces, and it shows. Then Mike looked at his feet. Dale, you and I have talked about this before. We would risk death to win against communism. But I'm not sure that anyone is trying to win anymore. The VS run or get beat every time they go out there, and some of the new teams in the field hunker down and give Covey new coordinates every day, just as if they were moving. They get picked up at the same LZ they went in. Wow. So while you're digesting all that, your thumb is picking up the habit of sliding around the coffee rim there, and you're going, and then you tell him, when I was home, everything in the news was anti-Vietnam War. The press doesn't report the news. It is a left-wing propaganda. This is 1969, early 70. They give aid and comfort to the enemy. Walter Cronkite is still calling the Tet Offensive the biggest defeat of American forces ever. Never mind that the Viet Cong attacked over 100 targets in one night and lost every battle and lost 35,000 soldiers, which all but destroyed the Viet Cong. Fact. Hard, cold fact. Underreported, misreported. And you write, I was on a roll venting. I heard one announcer on TV sneer, and said, "So if the Viet Cong lost 35,000 soldiers and were all but destroyed, tell us who was doing all the fighting." His voice was mocking and undisguised hatred for us fighting the war. It never occurred to him that the Viet Cong had been replaced by hardcore North Vietnamese regulars with modern equipment to include tanks and even MiGs and helicopters. Then you answered, "We have a bunch of anti-war pro-communist senators such as Senators Church, Mansfield, and Fulbright, and others who take our top secret missions and at the end of the day's session read them into the congressional record. That way, they are not really giving the information directly to the enemy. They would say it is not their fault the communists read the official document and got the message." Just before I left, the newspapers showed a picture of a crowd marching against the war in Washington, D.C. The newspaper banner said that 10,000 people protested at the Capitol. But Carl McIntyre in his magazine showed that the picture was cropped to make it look like a big crowd. He showed a picture of the same group from a distance. It was only a few hundred. But the press still clung to the headline that there were thousands and that Americans were all against the war. So then Mike responds and says, "Don't get me wrong, SOG is still fulfilling its mission as it always has. They are still the most professional, skilled soldiers in the world. I just think it might be good to look around for a while before you go back on the ground." That's his advice to you.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. And that was your return.
Yeah. One of those things where you have to quantify in your mind, is this really worth the risk anymore? You know, I'm anti-communist as I ever was.
Yeah.
But is it worth the near certitude that you are going to be killed or wounded in that next year? You know, which was the case. You know, 100% casualties. You know, and we come in and we'd meet the person in charge of us, and he'd say, "Well, welcome to this coming year, and you're going to be either killed or wounded this year." You know, and it's just a matter of which it's going to be.
Like you had like deja vu all over again, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So,
this is upon your return to Khartoum.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that your briefing that you got in the Trang when you volunteered, or when you were back at Khartoum and at CCC?
Yeah. In a Trang, they didn't really talk about Khartoum. I mean, the CCC.
Yeah.
Or CNC in general. They assigned you there, but it was kind of like it was secret enough. We're not going to talk about it. No, you knew where you were going. You know, you talk to Mrs. Alexander and say, "Where's my orders, Mrs. A?" You know.
Oh yeah. So, remind us who Mrs. A is.
Yeah,
because Billy Alexander, who was in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And she was the one who.
In James Bond movies, they had M,
right,
and then S and A.
Q, was it Q?
Q invented stuff.
Yeah.
We had a Q. He was Baker.
Right.
Yes, and then M was the director. That'd be Colonel Rowe.
Yes.
You know, or more exactly, it'd be the head of SOG.
Right. And we had 5 chief SOGs over the 8-year Secret War.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Mrs. Alexander gave the assignment. I think I mentioned in the book, I wanted to actually walk into her office and throw my beret like James Bond did and have it land on the hat rack with the 5th flash sticking out. But it was only by telephone. But I'd call her, explain who I was, and I says, "I'm speaking for my whole class that graduated, and where's our orders? You know, we really don't want to be raking leaves here on Fort Bragg, you know." And she said, "Well, we really want to prioritize people who are wanting to go." And I says, "We do." And I said, "We're waiting for orders." And she says, "Call me in a couple of days." And I called her, and hi, Dale. You know, she's a very personal lady.
Yeah, yeah.
I was talking to, we were just talking about him being killed, first sergeant, you know, and that's a different story too, you know, being him murdered.
Right.
I'd say she's an old lady. I had her pictured like Miss Marple. And he said, "No, she's blonde, a real looker," you know. And he says, "Tell her DeLuca." Yeah, he says, "Tell her DeLuca sent you." And boy, the next day I got my orders. And all the guys. So we all flew over together on a plane.
Yeah, she was a cool head. She was very attractive because I went down there in October of '69 to get out of 10th Group. And I went down in the morning, reported with the flowers and whatever wine she liked.
Oh, okay.
So I drove all night, got down there, go into the Pentagon. They get directly to her desk, gave her the stuff, requested to go back, explained why. Went back to my car in the parking lot, slept. Went back at 4 o'clock, and everything was ready to go. Cleared base. And on Monday, the MPs came in. By that time, I was en route to Vietnam.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, so DeLuca was also a major player in your life, became a good friend.
Yes.
And incredible stories with him because of his intel. And like one of these veteran SF people that young guys like us, we came in, we glammed onto them, and if we asked them good questions, they would give us rock solid information.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if you want to go into DeLuca, but
why not? We can talk a little bit about him, please.
He was our first sergeant. He's a guy, a small guy, Italian look. I don't know what DeLuca, whatever that is.
Yeah. That's Italian.
A guy who could cuss you out, and you knew he loved you at the same time. He had that knack of being an NCO, a leader, who you took everything because it was for your good. And DeLuca was just a great guy. And I was in Bangkok. Most special forces had their hangout, and it was the Opera Hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Small hotel, and we all met there. And we get a bad mission, and they say, "Well, we got a plane going, and you go over there, and
a little
and a couple,
R&R.
Yeah, a couple of us were at a table and eating the kind of food that you couldn't get in Vietnam, and in walks DeLuca, and he comes to our table and says, "Hey, and I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And we're just shooting the breeze and just enjoying them.
Because this is the same DeLuca who you met when you were on a C-130,
and he
going
remembers
out to the jump.
and teasing me on that jump, the first 141. He says, be careful jumping out too far because the Jado will burn your chute off. Oh, great, So he walks into the Opera Hotel and he's just smiling, happy, and I shooting a breeze. What have you been doing? And he says, well, my last assignment, I was putting limpet mines on Russian ships in Hanoi Harbor.
Really?
Yes.
I forgot that part of the story.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you orchestrate it and get it done? But that's what he was doing. Of course, he was small, Italian look, and he could easily transform himself into an Oriental look with a little bit of modification, but putting limpet mines on Russian ships in Hanoi Harbor. And then he says, then I went to Saigon, and my job is with SOG. And his thing was the POW thing. And then he started getting serious and sorrowful. He says, we know where all our people are. He says, we know exactly where we are. We know if they're in bamboo cages in half-sunken water, if they're tied to a post. He says, we know exactly where they're all at.
A lot of the same things that Novi told you about earlier.
And he says, I don't know.
A year earlier.
Yeah. He says, I don't know why we don't get them. He says, we're leaving them there. It was almost a political statement. It was like, maybe this is coming from higher than SOG. Maybe it's from the country team. Who knows?
Or the State Department scumbag Sullivan who was there.
Yeah. So DeLuca, then he lowers his voice. I think Mike Buckland was there. Boyd was there, and there's a couple other guys. We were at the table. He lowers his voice, and he says, I'm actually AWOL. He says, I left Saigon, I'm AWOL. He says, I cashed in all my money. I got all my chains. He says, I'm going to go get those POWs. And he says, so he's going to go from there. And I talked to John Plaster about this. My timing was that...
And John Plaster, just for the record, is somebody highly respected who had 3 tours of duty in SOG.
He overlapped, yes.
Ran recon 2.5 tours. And then his last tour, he flew Covey, which was an outstanding Covey rider.
Yeah.
And saved teams on the ground.
Yeah.
And, of course, you also had the experience of John purchasing 30-round magazine, which in your case, you being the epitome of the reason why I need a 30
Yeah, this is the reason we needed them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you were one of the people that he bought one magazine for, and you had them.
All of us got together.
John Plaster, who left as a major, retired, and is now He's the grandfather of SOG authors, by the way.
He wrote a cover letter, and we all signed it. We all put in $50 for one magazine.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of us did it. We tried to get as many people as we could. And then I got wounded, spent 5 months in convalescent and all that.
Yeah.
And when I got back, he says, I got your magazine. And I said, so quick. And he says, I didn't go through the government and I didn't go through Colt. He says, I went through a private contractor and I had 30-round magazines in 10 days.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that's how we got, I
forgot that part.
That is the invention of the 30-round magazine for the M16.
Yeah,
right there. And I says, I was the perfect reason we needed them. We talked about the Tet, and the Viet Cong being destroyed. Their basic weapon was the SKS, 5 rounds stuck in that little magazine well. Well, when they got destroyed,
this is early '68.
Yeah.
And by the middle of '68, a lot more were carrying the AK-47s
exactly,
by then.
Because they were destroyed. Essentially, they were replaced by the NVA, who had the MK, which is a 30-round magazine,
and which the media misreported as the Viet Cong farming in the day in the fields and the rice paddies. Then at night, they put on their black pajamas to be commie dogs. But they were wrong. They were NVA.
Yeah. So back to DeLuca.
Yeah,
DeLuca says, I have to say that because I'll forget where I'm at.
Yes.
DeLuca says I'm AWOL, and he says I'm going to go over there. I know where some of them are, and he says I'm going up north in northern Thailand, and I'm going to do whatever's necessary. Hire somebody, get the munitions I need, and we're going to go in and we're going to spring these POWs. So anyway, we say goodbye and all that kind of a thing.
This conversation is at FOB2 Kontum CCC.
No, it's in the Opera Hotel in Bangkok.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get that back on point.
Yeah. So anyway, he says, okay, I'm leaving in just a little while. So he leaves to go to do that. He's going to go north. He's going to get the guns and whatever people he needs up north, go across into Laos to where he knows there's POWs. Well, anyway, while we're still at the Opera Hotel, and I thought it was the same day, but when I was mentioning John Plaster, he says, no, it had to be a couple of days later. But he said, someone came in and said, Dale, did you hear what happened to DeLuca? And I says, I didn't want to spill beans like he's going north.
Right.
But what they were getting at is what happened after he went north.
Sure.
He said he was murdered.
What?
And they found him in a ditch. He was shot more than 20 times. And the word immediately.
So this isn't a Clinton suicide.
No.
Yeah. This is communism.
Yeah. So So the immediate word that came out was that CIA killed him.
Really?
That was the immediate word that went through everywhere, and it was like the people who were there, the people who were close by, and all this stuff. They all reported the CIA killed him. They didn't want us to go get POWs. And very quickly, and John Plaster says, no, the word that official word that's out was that he was killed by bandits because he had gold. So anyway, that's him. Well, anyway, ever since then.
How far outside of Bangkok was that?
Well, it'd be the northern part of Bangkok. So, and I'm not that familiar with distance. Probably 100, 200 miles north.
Oh, that far north?
Yeah, because John Plaster said he would have had to take the train to go up there, or a taxi of some sort. So he went up there, and I thought it was the same day, but it was a couple of days later that he was murdered. They found him in a ditch, all shot to pieces. And and
the gold was gone.
And the gold was gone, yeah. CIA went and had a party. But I never liked the CIA that much. But it was interesting because in me, from what DeLuca went through, and then tying it in with Kissinger, saying, well, those are acceptable casualties. And then what we knew after the war, because was about 20 years ago, 2 generals and an admiral went into Hawaii to where all the archives about our POWs, MIAs were, and they shredded it. They shredded all documentation.
Where did we hear that from?
It said several documents, but that's the disappearance of the POW stuff. And then the second big thing where generals and admirals went in and destroyed all evidence was the evidence that SOG of what we did, and that disappeared, which is why you can't get an upgrade on a medal, because all the documentation is gone.
Yeah, on top of that, I mean, at a Special Operations Association reunion 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago, a guy came up to me from Khartoum. He identified himself, gave me his name, and he says, I'm dying to talk to you because you've done these books. And he said, I was one of the last guys to leave Khartoum as we were leaving.
American,
USSF. And he said, my job was to destroy the records. I spent days. They had so much stuff between the after-action reports, intel reports that S2 had built up. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I said, well, okay, I'll call you back. Or here's my card. Please call me. I want to come back and do more on that. I never heard from him again. It was like, I should have just sat down.
And, of course, America has got this thing about not wanting and not trying to get our POWs back. And you and I had a conversation about all the way back to World War II. I was telling you about John Noble. And
please talk about that a little bit, because this is what we can head down the trail to close out on the POW issue, or POW MIA issue, because it's just something that's gnawed at anybody that was in SOG.
Yeah.
So many of our people are still, quote, like that 50 Green Berets that are still MIA today.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't play out right in my mind. Yeah. But anyways, as you're saying before I interrupt you,
about
John Noble.
Yeah, about 19. Thank you. For keeping this old guy on his.
We help each other, bro. It's still teamwork here.
Yeah, I think this is about 1959, 59. I think I was about 6th grade. It might be a little bit off. And for some reason, I hit it off with my science teacher, who was a hunter, a fisherman, and all that stuff, conservative. He was into working out and stuff, too. And he said that there's a speaker, John Noble, and he's going to be speaking in the Coliseum or auditorium in the school. And so we went to hear him, and his story was fabulous. It's documented. I've read his books several times. If you look up John Noble, I Was a Slave in Soviet Russia is one of them, and some other ones. But as he recalled the story to me, he is a German-American, like just he's got relatives in Germany. And his family had a factory in Germany, someplace Berlin or something. So he went over to look at the family factory. And as he went over there, Hitler had his people arrest him, and they put him in a concentration camp and seized the factory. And so he spent the entire World War II in a concentration camp. And so he was privy to not so much the Jewish thing where they were being executed, but rather the working thing, And so he spent the entire World War II there. He said when the Russians came in and beat Germany, rather than freeing the prisoners that were in the jails and the prisons, the Germans simply took the Russians simply took the German prisoners and made them Russian prisoners. So all the American POWs that the Germans had, the Russians put them in boxcars and brought them into the Gulag in Siberia. And among those was John Noble. And he spent the entire war there. He had a phenomenal memory, like some people have, where he memorized the names and pertinent details of over 5,000 American GIs who were in the Gulag and working in the mines and stuff. And his books reflected those experiences. Somehow he met a diplomat that was coming into the north part, and he was from Sweden. And he gave him his personal information. My name is John Noble. I'm an American citizen. I'm a civilian. I've been here and so forth. And anyway, he got that. He says, could you somehow get it to the embassy or someone who can help me? And so finally, that information went all the way up to General Eisenhower. And General Eisenhower personally intervened, and John Noble was released from the Gulag. And as he did so, he gave the names of over 5,000 American GIs that Russia still had and they were technically our allies and never released and never did release ever. Well, that kind of a thing continued. It continued in Korea.
This is 59.
When I met him,
Right.
yes. And it happened in Korea where we left our POWs.
Sure, there's still 7,000 POWs.
Yeah, and we never got them back. We never tried very hard. France did the same thing. And then from Vietnam, the list that Kissinger folded up, where are they? Or for that matter, Afghanistan.
Oh, my God.
We left them. As soon as the news media doesn't sell advertising anymore, the story's gone, the public's memory forgets, and we have a history of that. And we had our special forces people like Norm Doney and those guys tried to get our POWs back.
Norm worked for decades on that after the war.
And the official government, the United States government, had their own, and they seemed to put something in the way of every chance that we had to get POWs on. And the one that was released finally was Garwood. And you all remember Garwood.
Right, sure.
Was a private in the Marine Corps.
Marine Corps, right.
Yes. And I'll give you two stories. And Garwood was, talk about eliminate with prejudice, how you destroy his reputation before he gets out. Garwood was classed as a deserter and all that stuff.
Right.
He was never, ever, to this date, has never been interviewed for what he knows, what he has seen. And that's a typical thing. One more is Bob Howard. Robert Howard, the most decorated man in American history. Bob Howard, and I know about this story, Bob Howard and two other guys were sent to try find POWs. They sent
Fred
them.
Zabatowski in 83, but that's where Bo Greitz got involved with it, and then it was corrupted. Because they had, and this is Bob Brown talked a little bit about too. But Bob Brown, a soldier of fortune, put money into an effort to get to those camps.
Yeah.
But Bo Greitz at that time had misled them, and in my mind,
Inadvertently?
they were there. Well,
Hard
I
to
don't
know.
want to. I don't have hard documentation. Just generally say that Bo had misled, and there are others that came back. I talked to Fred Zabatowski after that, because Fred was one of the people that was there also, and he said that the effort was thwarted from internal politics and things that went wrong from Bo's side. And I forgot about Bob Howard being involved in that, but there were serious efforts. And then, of course, by that time, there was a movie or two that came out, Left Behind or whatever it was, with Chuck Norris.
Yeah, and one with Gene Hackman. Well, anyway, Bob Howard and the other two guys were sent, and the State Department, wherever they sent them, they were relatively certain there were no POWs. That's how they did it. Well, anyway, Bob Howard and the guys are on a hillside, and they got their spotting scopes and all that stuff. They count
In Laos?
I don't know if it's Laos or Cambodia, one of the two.
Okay.
I think Laos. And anyway, they're watching through the spotting scopes, and they count 26 American POWs. They're right there.
What year was this?
No, I can't tell
Probably
you that.
early 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when Fred was over there.
Yeah. And anyway, he's too many for him to handle, 26 POWs, plus he'd have to take out the enemy. And so he needs help. So he calls back to Washington, D.C., whoever the sender was. He calls back and says, I have, I don't know what code we use, soap bubbles or round hats, whatever it was. I have 26 round hats and the enemy there, too much for me to handle, send in the Delta. And the answer that came back to him was liquidate the merchandise.
What?
Yes. And obviously he refused. The chopper came in.
When did you hear this? Or how? Or
I don't know where and how, but it was...
you remember because it's stuck.
Oh, and more than one. And it was absolutely true. And anyway, he comes back, and the State Department meets the helicopter and are in the process of arresting him as being a deserter. Yeah, and all of a sudden somebody says, wait a minute, we got the most decorated man in American history. He's not exactly a deserter. And the other guy, one of the guys, all of a sudden I forgot his name. He takes off. He says, I'm not having this. This is He takes off on a run. And I think when they finally lit down, it was close to Bangkok, because that night he gets stabbed in an alley in Bangkok, and he lives through the stabbing, though. And then I don't remember what happened to the third person. But anyway, that was kind of typical. There's another one with Frenchie Amundsen, was at one of our SOAR meetings, that she was going to testify before Congress. And she was a POW in World War II.
Right.
Yeah. And she was just so excited at the SOAR. She was going to testify, and maybe she could get something done. And next thing we know, suicide in her hotel room. No, not her. Yeah. And so this thing about POWs, I don't know what it is. It's not like Russia, where Russia, when we freed our POWs and the Russian POWs, they went back to Russia, Stalin had them all executed, because just even being in a prison where there were Americans was enough to taint them against communism.
Right.
It's not like that, but for some reason, we don't want our POWs back.
Well, we'll have to look at that a future SOGCast, but that's a point that's just enraging.
Yes.
To hear that.
Yeah.
And we worked on our small way trying to go through the government. It always seems like it's the roundabout way, and we never get direct answers. And nothing like that kind of information. We have to go back now and do a little more research after this, that's for sure. As we head down the closeout trail here, you got another interview coming up. Any last, final closing thoughts as we close down here?
I think this is it.
And there was other missions. And again, the book is outstanding. Born Twice by Dale Hanson. Recommended reading by one and all. Not only phenomenal, unbelievable war stories, but it's outstanding writing. Even you made it fascinating what it was like to grow up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So with that thought in mind, anything further?
That's it.
So we wanted to, at this point, again, thank Jocko Willink Productions for making this production of SOGCast possible, and in conjunction with SOG Chronicles. And we want to thank all the men and the women in our armed services who have fought and bled for the country. We want to thank our Border Patrol, law enforcement, first responders, and we encourage people, like we were talking about John Plaster, SOGCast number 10, and he's now up on YouTube. And our productions are first come out as audio podcasts on Spotify and Apple. And then we now have 13 of our first interviews on SOGCast that are now on YouTube. Encourage you to share them. And we also wanted to thank the men and women who have sacrificed for the years in the past, and for heroes like Dale, who have fought for our country. We also want to remember and salute the men and women who did not return from the war, and for their families, and for what they've gone through over the last 54 years. And also, again, we thank Jocko. You can go to his website, his books, and my website is SOG Chronicles. We have our books, our other podcasts are all listed there. Thank you. God bless America. Till next time.